Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Chapter 121, You don't have strength but you have me here. What did you say? Gregory once again raised his voice. He didn't even know who's that brat, so what's the point in telling his name? Lamilia, explain what's that Sudaishi man that you said, Ursus said. You may not know it but I know him too well, Lamilia said, and she paused for a moment before she continued, he's my classmate. He's the top student in Lodro Institute and currently the famous strongest first-year student who rivaled Yanagi Shina's deed when she was still a first-year student. He's your classmate? Ursus looked at Lamilia in the eyes and asked. He was stunned when he heard that man also was a student of Lodro Institute, but what shocked him the most was that Suda was the top student. Yes. Lamilia nodded her head and added, did you know that the Lodro Institute is very protective of its top students? You shouldn't lay your hands on him if you don't want to face the Lodro Institute's wrath. Lodro Institute was well known for supporting its top students. The incident where Yanagi Shina beat the royal prince was still fresh in everyone's mind. No one dared to take revenge on her because they know she had Lodro Institute's full support in her back. As long as she wasn't at fault, she could use Lodro Institute name. That support was really Lamilia's goal in enrolling in the Lodro Institute. She wanted Lodro Institute's support no matter what so that she could attain her freedom. Unfortunately, she didn't even manage to enter the top 10 with her current strength. She tried her best to increase her strength in the past few months, but then she realized that there were tons of stronger people in the whole kingdom and the gap between them was too large. If she could only enter the top 10 ranker, then she would receive the Lodro Institute's attention and protection. And if Suda could really rival Yanagi Shina's deeds, then there's no doubt about it. The Lodro Institute was going to back Suda in case Gregory laid his hands on him. A single noble family like Vidrato family was like an ant to the power of the Lodro Institute. 4 to 5 teachers were enough to bring down his whole family. No, if those all-powerful people came on his door, then he would be gone. Bargain Heavyfield, the flame master of the Malosa War. The man who single-handedly pushed back the Malosa army in the outskirt of the desolate woods 20 years ago. Sabrina Londivan, the magic caster of destruction. A woman who graduated from Lodro Institute. She once fought the legendary S-rank adventurer on her own to a standstill. She was famous for her AoE spell that could take thousands of monsters in an instant. Jess Blueleaf, the man that was called the Blue Flash. He an exiled ocean elf and wandered in the continent. In the chaotic period, he fought a lot of powerful people and became a famous swordsman. In the end, lost to Bargain, and he followed Bargain at that time. Lastly, Azrim, the principal of the Lodro Institute. The demi who was called to match the god from the gods continent 50 years ago. This demi was well known in the whole continent of Giza as the Raging White Fox. Lodro Institute was like a factory that nurtured high-quality products in the whole kingdom. That. Gregory opened his eyes widely when he heard her words. Top student of Lodro Institute. Could rival Yanagi Shina's deeds? If all of these were true, then it's impossible to touch Suda without getting himself burned. The scariest part about Lodro Institute wasn't its overall power but its various connection over the whole kingdom. The Lodro Institute nurtured a lot of students, and some of these students become an influential figure in the whole Hebrei kingdom. Just like the captain of the royal guard. That man was extremely powerful and he doted the students of Lodro Institute. If Gregory touched the Lodro Institute's top students, then he would gather the attention of all those scary people. It's not worth getting on the bad side of those people. Are you saying the truth? Ursus asked. He couldn't believe what he heard just now. The top student of the Lodro Institute was an adventurer. He thought that it was impossible for that guy to become a top student if he couldn't focus on his study. If you don't believe me, then you can ask him and check his device, Lamilia said while pointing the device on her wrist that record their information. This device could also track the students' whereabouts so that the Lodro Institute could send force if something bad happened. With this, they would understand that they couldn't touch Suda. In fact, they should curry his favor in case he became a big shot in the future. Ursus and Gregory couldn't say anything. They have no other choice but to believe Lamilia's words. If there's nothing else, I'll go now, father, Lamilia said before she bowed and left the room. Actually, Suda wasn't even in the top 10 ranker of the first year. Brian's rank was even higher than him, but he was recognized as the most powerful first-year student. It was because in the special test he alone dominated the whole test. He fought several rankers alone and still managed to beat them. Even if it wasn't a ranking battle, that feat alone made him acknowledged as the most powerful first-year student, that rivaling Yanagi Shina's deeds. Some of the people in the Lodro Institute were already comparing Sudaishi to Yanagi Shina when she was still a first-year student. Wait, stay here. I've something important to tell you. Ursus stopped Lamilia from leaving. I'll leave now. Gregory glanced at Ursus and said before he stood up. Take care, Lord Gregory, Lamilia said to Gregory in a polite tone. Outside the room, Jasmine, Brianna, and Jane looked at Lamilia with a worried expression. They heard Lord Gregory's loud voice and aura from the outside. They could feel that he was angry at something. After a few seconds, the door opened and Gregory left the room. They all looked at Gregory and saw his face with a frown. They wondered what really happened inside. Siddha turned his head and looked in the direction where he felt the outburst of mana. Mana outburst didn't last long as it immediately disappeared. He recalled that's the direction where Lamilia was heading before. It seems that something happened for a moment there. He shook his head and looked at Yuko. He smiled and said, "It's fine now, it will fully recover tomorrow." Mew. Yuko stuck out her tongue and licked his cheeks. Good girl, good girl. Siddha smiled as he patted her head. He then heard footsteps behind him. He turned his head and saw a chubby middle-aged man with blonde hair. The middle-aged man stopped walking and looked at Siddha. Siddha also looked at the man and felt a hint of killing intent, but it immediately vanished. After a few seconds, the middle-aged man averted his head and started walking once again. That man. I'm looking forward to it. Siddha smiled while looking at the back of the man. There's no doubt about it. That was killing intent. With that look and aura, Siddha could guess that man will make a move tonight. I guess I will trigger another quest tonight, probably. I'm not sure. Siddha rubbed his chin as he muttered. Once again, he heard footsteps behind him. He guessed that it was Lamilia and the other because of the number of footsteps. He turned his head and saw that it was Lamilia and the others. He was right, so he patted Yuko and said, "Let's go Yuko, let's continue our job." The two followed Lamilia. It was late at night when it's Siddha's time to guard Lamilia. Siddha was fully armed tonight because he guessed that man he saw this afternoon will make a move. "Siddha, are you there?" Lamilia said from inside the room. "Yes, I'm here," Siddha replied to her. "Once you go back to the institute, can you keep this a secret from Lin and Neo?" Lamilia said. "I understand, but..." Siddha said as he looked at the door. He then leaned his back on the door and continued, "Are you sure about this? You're not going back?" I don't know what I should do. Recently my father managed to acquire a bottle of crystal flame bee honey and the other nobles wanted to get a piece of it. They also knew that I'm the target of the nobles from Melosa country. They used this chance to pressure our family to hand the honey. In exchange, they will help us from the problem of the nobles from Melosa country. Lamilia decided to tell him the problem she was facing. Siddha lent her his ears as he listened to everything she said. The two of them were leaning back on the door. They were separated by a single piece of metal. Siddha looked up at the starry night as the cold breeze of night gently blew on his face. After a while, Siddha opened his mouth and said, "You've been hit by reality, huh? If you don't want it then reject it." "But I don't." Lamilia didn't manage to finish her sentence as Siddha interrupted her. "You don't have power but you have me here." Siddha grinned as he said. "Yuko is also here. Just ask me and I will help you with all of my power. That's the problem with nobles, you're too dependent on your parents. You can't make a choice on your own. You have to at least think about yourself before you follow others." Did I say everything right? I could vaguely remember those words from my old world. Siddha thought as he rubbed his chin. Chapter 122, I've decided. Siddha understood why there's a lot of nobles visiting this place. It was because they wanted the crystal flame bee honey. The effect of that honey was something that couldn't be compared to the mystical light cherry. A drop of that honey could increase a person's stats by 50 and mana pool by 200. The added stats will decrease by 5 every subsequent use of the crystal flame honey and the mana added will decrease by 10. It means that it could increase a person's every stats by 275 in total. Even Brian would be able to match him if Brian consumed those honey. It could even make a normal person match those lower ranking in the institute. If you really don't want to get married then I suggest you start living on your own. Don't let those things tide you up like a slave. Siddha said. Of course I'll help you if you ask me. Can I really live on my own? Lamilia asked. If you have the will, you can do it, Siddha replied to her before he stood up and grabbed the handle of the Vajra sword Saya. He said, well, we have some visitors now so we can continue our chat later after I take care of this. Lamilia was confused when she heard his words. Siddha patted his clothes and he slowly pulled his sword out of its sheath. He then looked at the 10 figures in front of him. All of them were wearing black cloaks and mask. They were also armed with sharp weapons. These people. Siddha looked at the people who were wearing black cloaks. He couldn't feel any intention to kill from these people. Maybe they were an expert that could completely hide their blood u.s.t or not. If they were an expert then they don't need that much people. 10 people appearing at the same time in front of the door and they deliberately let Siddha saw them. Maybe, their target wasn't Lamilia at all. That fat man in the afternoon. Siddha guessed that it was the fat man that he saw this morning. But why? He tried to recall anything that he did ever since he arrived in the city. So that's how it is. Suda smirked as he rubbed his chin. He guessed that the young noble he beat before was a relative of that fat man. It all makes sense if it's this way. That fat man came here to discuss the marriage, but fiancé didn't manage to come because Suda broke all the bones from his 4 limbs. Then, Lumilia's father knew that one of the adventurers that his daughter hired fitted the description of the man who assaulted the fiancé. While Suda was thinking through things, one of the figures dashed towards him. The figure threw several daggers towards him. Suda looked at it and he simply moved his body sideways to avoid the daggers. "Crush them, Yuko," he said in a low voice. Yuko roared loudly when she heard Suda. She dashed towards the group of people wearing black cloaks. Suda glanced at her before he focused his attention on the figure in front of him. The man pulled out 2 swords underneath his cloaks and charged towards Suda. Clang! 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 Suda exchanged blows with the man and realized that this man was weaker than the assassin that attacked them before. He was sure now that these people were the fat man's subordinates. First, if the fat man was the person who sent the assassins to kill Lumilia before, then he would understand that these people were weaker than those assassins. So he wouldn't send a people of this level which was weaker than the previous assassin. But there's something that's bothering him. These people didn't have a tiny bit of blood.u.s.t in their aura. It feels like they were not here to kill him. If so, then why did they come here? Just to beat him? No, there's a missing piece that he couldn't get to complete this puzzle. Agility boost, strength boost, cat speed, and triple muscle strengthening. Suda used all of his buff spells and combat arts that could temporarily increase his stats for a short amount of time. I will subdue them. Suda decided to not kill them so that he could get more information out of them. They were not a professional assassin, so they wouldn't be able to endure his interrogation. The figure in front of him quickly waved his swords in left and right. Suda quickly took a step back and found that the wall was just behind him. Since there's no time to dodge, Suda used his sword to block the attack on his right side. He then gathered his mana on his left hand and caught the sword with his bare hand. The man stopped for a moment when he saw what Suda did. Suda grinned before he lifted up his feet and kicked the stomach of the man. The man flew a few meters away before he crashed on the ground. Suda could coat a part of his body with his mana to strengthen it. He could do this with his level 3 mana manipulation. He was about to dash towards the man once again when he noticed that something's wrong. There were 10 people in total that appeared here, but only 1 person attacked him. Suda moved his eyes and found that the remaining 9 people were fighting Yuko alone. He frowned and when saw it, but he decided to watch it. It will be a good chance to give Yuko some battle experience in fighting humans and demis. Suda turned his head towards the man that he knocked out only to find that man was gone. Suddenly, a black figure flashed behind him with 2 sharp swords in his hands. The figure was about to slash his sword when shadows burst out of the ground. It was so fast that it bound the figure in an instant. Suda turned his head and looked at the figure. "Stay here for a while," he said as the shadows covered the figure's mouth. Suda shifted his attention to Yuko and the remaining 9 people. Lumilia heard a sound of fighting coming from outside. She was worried about Suda, so she opened the door and saw that Suda was sitting on the ground while watching Yuko fight 9 unknown people. What are you doing, Suda?" Lumilia opened her mouth and asked. She then noticed the man beside Suda. The man was tightly bound by several shadows. There were several blood holes on his body and it looks like some of his bones were broken. The man's nails were plucked out and scattered on the ground. The skin on the leg of the man was taken off as blood was flowing out of it. Lumilia opened her mouth widely when she saw such a gore scene. "Shh." Suda looked at her and placed his finger in front of his lips. "Come here, I'll tell you what happened." Lumilia nodded her head and she walked beside Suda. She was disturbed by the scene beside Suda. Suda glanced at her and he noticed that she was bothered by the sights beside him, so he waved his hand and several shadows emerged from the ground. The shadows covered the man's whole body so the Lumilia couldn't see the sight anymore. Suda looked around and guessed that the patrolling knights will arrive in this area after a few minutes. He already memorized the time where the knights were patrolling, so these people too. Why don't you help Yuko?" Lumilia asked as she lifted up her head and looked at Yuko, who was fighting 9 people at the same time. That's a good question. The answer to that is I wanted her to gain some experience in fighting humans. I will let it be and only finish it when the knights are going to arrive," Suda said as he watched the battle. Yuko already took several cuts on her body. The people that attacked them weren't as powerful as the assassins before, so it's not a problem to her. This morning he overreacted when some random noble guy cut Yuko's side, but now Yuko has several cuts on her body. Suda didn't even do anything. He just continued watching her fight. Well, for him the incident this morning was different from here. They were relaxing this morning and those guys disturbed them, so it's natural to punish them. Right now, it's training time. It's natural to receive wounds and injuries when you're in a battle. I'll tell you something before the patrolling knights arrived. Sita paused for a moment before he continued, these people are from the Vidrato family. Gregory, that fat man, sent these people to kill Yuko. They knew that they couldn't kill me because of the Ladro Institute behind me, that's why they shifted their attention to Yuko. What? Lamilia was stunned when she heard Sita's words. To think that all the warning she said was in vain. Gregory still dared to trouble Sita despite knowing that he had Ladro Institute in his back. You know, I'm hypocrite. I'm not a saint. Sita's tone turned colder. The atmosphere around him started to change. He slowly opened his mouth and said, I've decided, I will kill them all. Chapter 123, Chain Quest, Preparing. Gregory greatly underestimated him and Yuko. He thought that these people were enough to hold him off and kill Yuko. He should have at least brought someone who was at the level of the assassin before. I will get you back for this. I will collect your soul and you will become my nutrition. Sita thought as he grinned. He then stood up and patted his clothes. The patrolling knights will arrive here soon, so Sita decided to finish this immediately. That's enough, Yuko. Sita said in a loud voice, and it gathered the attention of the people who were wearing black cloaks. The ground beneath Sita's feet immediately turned into shadows. The shadows spread quickly and it emerged from the ground. The people who were wearing black cloaks were caught off guard. Sita followed it up by casting Shadow Spike. It pierced their bodies like a piece of paper. He knew that they were still alive, so he used Crimson Moon skill to completely kill them. It was at this moment when he heard the system prompts in his head. Come here. He grabbed one of the people on the neck. This person was the only one he left alive. Sita didn't need to know the truth from this man as he already interrogated the individual that he killed before. He only needed the knowledge of this man, he's the witness that Gregory sent these people after him. So when he attacked someone from the Vidrato family, he had a good reason for it. Just fall asleep, Sita said as he knocked out the man. He will protect this person and used him to pressure the Vidrato family. He then heard a voice behind him. I didn't think that he will send out his people to attack despite all the things that I've said to him, Lamilia said as she looked at the man that was in Sita's arms. Can you tell me more about that? Sita looked at her and asked. It seems that she's the reason why the Vidrato family knew about him being a student of the Ladro Institute. Okay. Lamilia nodded at him and she began to narrate what happened in the meeting room. Sita just listened to her story until the patrolling knights arrived in the scene. I see. I appreciate your help. Sita said as he thanked her. He and Lamilia turned their heads when they heard several footsteps. They found that some of the knights approached them. The knights asked Sita various questions and Sita cooperated with them. While these knights were asking Sita some questions, some of the knights were cleaning the scene. The knights took the man from him. Sita didn't say anything as he let them took the man. He already has a plan to take back that man before he departed. Sita shook his head and looked at Yuko. Come here, Yuko. Yuko ran towards him when he mentioned her name. She stuck out her tongue and licked his cheeks. Good job, that's my girl. Sita hugged her in return and used the light heal spell to close some of her wounds. Lamilia looks like she wanted to say something. Sita turned his head to the side to look at Lamilia. He smiled and asked, what is it? Have you made your desi dash? Sita didn't manage to complete his sentence as Yuko moved her huge body and blocked his vision. Oi! Yuko! We're talking here. Just sit here for a while. Sita looked at Yuko and said while pointing at his side. Mew. Yuko dropped her shoulders when Sita raised his voice. She quietly sat at the spot that Sita pointed. Don't worry, I will buy you a bunch of fruits that you want later. Sita gently smiled as he patted her head. Sita. Lamilia looked at Sita with a serious expression. It seems that she finally decided what she should do. Sita looked at her. He just simply looked at her and didn't say anything. He just waited for what she was about to say. I finally realized it. I don't want to be bound by my family, but I can't do anything on my own. Please, Sita. Lend me your strength. Lamilia said as she raised her voice. Sita waved his hand and used his mana so that her voice couldn't travel far in the knight's area. Very well, I'll help you to the best of my ability, Sita said as his mouth curved into a grin. At the same time, he heard a familiar sound in his mind. Chain quest triggered. Lamilia quest 1, leave the Asver's territory within an hour. Reward, 1000 EXP, 2 free attribute points, and 1 skill point. Sita smiled inwardly when he found that the quest he triggered this time was a chain quest. To think that this was Lamilia's chain quest. If he completed all the quest in chain quest, then he would earn a high amount of skill points and free attribute points. The only problem was the final quest of the chain quest. It was harder than all the quests that he took since he arrived here in this world. The chain quest usually consisted of 3 quests, but some of the chain quests have more than 10 quests in it. Sita looked at Lamilia and said, prepare yourself immediately. We will leave this place right now. Since the quest said that they should leave this place within 1 hour, something will happen in this place if they don't leave. Right now. Lumilia was shocked when she heard that Suda already planned to leave this place right now. Yeah, I thought you've resolved yourself. Suda said while looking at her eyes. Lumilia took a deep breath and she nodded her head at Suda. Her eyes were burning in determination. Go back to your room and change your clothes, Suda said as he pointed at her room. Lumilia looked down at her clothes and found that she was in her pajamas. She hurriedly went back to her room to change her room. Suda looked at her back and shook his head. He then turned his head sideways and found that the Gale group was walking towards his direction in haste. What happened here, Suda? Brianna asked him as she looked around the place. I've heard that some people attack you, Tider said as he looked in a direction where the knights were cleaning a pool of blood on the ground. They were in their room when they heard the knights were talking about this incident, so they immediately came here to check if everything's alright. Yeah, some people attack us but they were too weak to kill me. Suda nodded at Brianna and said. He looked at them with a serious expression and said, we'll leave this place. Can you tell us the reason why? Brianna asked him. It's not a problem for me, Suda said as he looked around and tried to sense if there's someone eavesdropping on them. When he found none he began to talk in a low voice. Lumilia came here to annul her engagement but she couldn't do so because of the current situation of the family. A lot of nobles are eyeing the Asver's family, including those from the Malosa country. Lumilia decided to flee from her engagement from the young master of the Vidrato family. Since she was really the target of the nobles from Malosa country, if she left her family then those nobles will focus on her. It took her all of her wills before she managed to resolve herself. She decided to trust her classmate, Sudaishi, the only one who was willing to help her in this whole city. Suda told them everything that he knew. Then, all we have to do is to safely escort her back to Ladro city to complete her quest. Tider asked. Yeah, that's the gist of it. Suda nodded at him. He then recalled something. Also, don't worry about the payment. If Lumilia doesn't have any money in her pocket, then I will be the one that will pay all of you. You're a good classmate, Suda, Tider said as he patted Suda's back. Not everyone will do anything for their classmates. Brianna smiled and said. I wonder about that. At least I know one person that will help anyone in need without hesitation. Suda replied to them. The news traveled fast and Gregory immediately knew that his plan failed. Damn. I've greatly underestimated that brat. Gregory said angrily as he smashed his table into pieces. Since he knew that Suda was the strongest first-year student, he thought that his power level was just slightly stronger than the people he sent. That's also the reason why he sent 10 people just to get rid of that bear. He never thought that Suda's strength was higher than he could imagine. Lord, one of the people we sent is still alive. What should we do? Gregory's assistant asked him. Kill him. We don't want to let anyone know about our involvement in this or else we would see the power of Ladro Institute. Gregory said. Then he added, that institute is full of monsters that we can't afford to fight. Suda looked in the sky and said, this will be a long night. Chapter 124, Chain Quest, Getting the Man Back. Suda, don't tell me. You like Miss Lumilia? Tider said as he looked at Suda with wide eyes. Brianna, Jane, John, and Tim turned their head and looked at Suda as if they wanted to know if it's true. Suda sighed and said, I wonder about that. But who knows what will happen in the future. He then patted Yuko's head and said, I currently don't have someone like except for Yuko. That's too bad. I really thought that you have. Tider dropped his shoulders. Really, if you're already like this to a girl who's just your classmate, I wonder what can you do if you found someone that you like, Jane said to him. I don't know about that. But if I'll use Yuko as a reference then I'm prepared to annihilate the Adventurers Guild, so that those hunters wouldn't give Yuko some trouble. Suda said to them. You're really something. Not everyone can say the same words as you do. Brianna smiled wryly and said. It's easy to say, hard to do. I could even say that I could even kill those gods for Yuko. Suda said and he shook his head. Well, let's prepare now. I've still got something to so wait Lumilia here. He didn't even let the Gale group question him as he already started running. Yuko. Stay here for a while. Suda left those words before he vanished into thin air. Brianna, Tider, Jane, and the rest of the Gale group could only stare at the place where Suda disappeared. Suda was hiding in the bushes. He tracked the footprint of the knights and it led him in the underground base of the Asver's mansion. Underground? I guess that all the nobles' mansion has an underground base. Suda muttered as he rubbed his chin. All the intruders that they caught were placed in the bas.e.m.e.nt. They didn't hand it in the hands of the city guards at all. I only have 1 hour to leave this place, so I will take back that man quickly, Suda said. He then looked around and only saw 2 knights guarding the bas.e.m.e.nt. He took a deep breath and silently clenched his fists. The two knights were talking to each other. They don't have any idea that Sita was going to attack them. Suddenly, shadows burst out of the ground and strangled their bodies. What the dash, the knights were about to shout when the shadows covered their mouths and eyes. Sita did this so that they wouldn't know that he attacked them. Sita jumped out of the bushes and he charged straight to the two knights. He gathered his mana in both of his fists and he swiftly knocked out the two knights. The shadows disappeared and the two knights fell down on the ground. Sleep well. Sita looked down at the two unconscious knights and said before he went down in the bas.e.m.e.nt. He wouldn't kill these knights because there's no enmity between him and the Asver's family. Also, these people were Asver's family's knights. He wouldn't kill them for no reason because he doesn't want Lumilia knew that he was killing the knights of their family. It would leave a bad impression on her. Sita walked downstairs until he found a corridor that has jails on each side. At the end of the corridor, he saw the knights were locking up the man inside a jail. Sita bent his knees and charged towards the knights while casting Shadow Bind at the same time. Who the hell are you? One of the knights asked with an angry expression as Sita arrived in front of him. Sita delivered a powerful blow on his stomach, directly knocking him on the wall. Sita then lifted up his feet and kicked the jaw of the other knight. The knight directly lost his consciousness when Sita kicked his jaw. He fell on the ground as his armor made a loud metallic sound. It's done. Sita said and he looked at the unconscious man who was wearing a black cloak. He was about to carry him when he heard an ear-piercing sound coming from behind. He quickly coated his body using his mana and went inside the jail. A powerful gust of wind passed by in the corridor and crashed in the wall. It caused a small explosion as the wall got destroyed and the debris of rocks shot up. Ah, this skill is really too loud. Sita heard a voice echoed in the corridor. He checked the unconscious man and carried the man in one hand. He then grabbed the handle of the Vajra sword Saya before he pulled it out. As soon as he stepped out, the ground turned black and it spread immediately in the whole area. Several shadows that looked like tentacles emerged from the ground. Go. Sita muttered as he looked at the man who was wearing silver armor. This man was also a knight of the Asver's family but he was stronger than the level of the normal knights. This is cheating, right? I don't have enough space to avoid those things. The knight smiled wryly while looking at the countless shadows around Sita. He then looked at Sita's face and said, but still to think that you're the one behind this is out of my expectations. You know, I'm the one who caught this guy but why you knights are acting like you're the one who caught him, Sita said as he lifted the man in his hand. He showed it to the man and added, well, let's finish this. The shadows around Sita stretched out and went straight towards the knight. The knight knew that he was at a disadvantage if he's going to fight Sita in the bas.e.m.e.nt. So he decided to retreat towards the surface. Sita noticed that the knight went on the surface. That knight knew that there's nothing good that will happen if he fought Sita here in the bas.e.m.e.nt. Sita placed back the Vajra sword in its sheath. He then looked up in the ceiling before he lifted up his hand. He made a grabbing motion in the air as his mana flared up. The knight noticed that something was wrong. He bent his knees and quickly jumped in the air. After a few seconds, several shadow spikes burst out of the ground. If I didn't notice it, then that spikes are currently drilling inside my body. The knight said with a sigh while looking at the shadow spikes. If I'm not wrong, he's just a D rank adventurer but the power he showed could be compared to those who are at C rank. He landed on the ground and he tightened his grip on his sword. He looked at the path towards the bas.e.m.e.nt and heard loud footsteps. He's here. The knight smiled wryly as he used several combat arts that could temporarily increase his strength. Suddenly, he opened his eyes widely and once again jumped in the air as several shadow spikes burst out of the ground. He then saw tentacles like shadows stretched out towards him with high speed. The knight waved the sword in his hand while using combat arts. Threefold slash. What? The knight was shocked when he saw that he didn't manage to cut the shadows in half. He only managed to push it away from him. This guy really has the power of a C rank adventurer despite having his rank lower than that. He thought. D rank adventurers were already called veterans. Their powers were already decent enough to do some difficult quest. C rank was quite sought in the Adventurers Guild because of their power level. They could handle those monsters that were going to form their monster orb. In other words, they could fight the monsters that undergo first and second evolution. B rank was a powerful adventurer. Some of the B rank adventurers joined the elite group of Adventurers Guild called Hunters. They were powerful enough to match the monster that has a monster orb. The knight carefully landed on the spikes while tightly gripping his sword, and then he saw a ball of shadow heading towards him. He shifted his body to the side and the ball of shadow passed beside him. Suddenly, a sword pierced through his body. Ugh. He spat a mouthful of blood as he looked down at the sword on his chest. He then turned his head and saw Sita grinning behind him. How? Ah, it's really good if your opponent didn't know the effect of your spell. Suda beamed a bright smile as he slowly pulled out the Vajra sword on the knight's chest. Don't worry, I won't kill you. I don't want Lumilia to hate me after all. He then proceeded to smash the nape of the knight using the handle of the sword. It knocked down the man and Suda used light heal to stop the bleeding. Okay, let's go now, Suda said before he disappeared. Chapter 125, Chain Quest, Knocking Out the Guards. Suda arrived in front of Lumilia's room and saw that she already finished her preparation. Who's that man, Suda? Brianna asked him while looking at the unconscious man that he was carrying. This. Suda lifted up the man and said, this man is one of the people who attack us. The one behind that attack is probably going to send some people to silence this man, so I'm going to protect him as I wanted him alive. So that's how it is. Brianna nodded at his explanation. She knew that if Suda wanted to open the assassination to the public he needed at least some evidence, and this man was the proof of it. As long as this man was still alive there's some value to him. Suda turned his head to John and said, can you hold him until we leave the city? Okay, leave him to me. John nodded at him and took the man from Suda. He took out a rope from his bag and tied the man so that even if the man woke up he wouldn't be able to give them some troubles. Probably the man too would realize that his lord was going to dispose him when he woke up. The man knew his lord well more than the rest of them. Good, let's go now. Suda nodded and said to them. The Gale group nodded at him. They were already prepared to leave the city with him. But what about Jasmine and Fred? Lumilia asked him. She was concerned about her maid and butler the most in this kind of situation. It's better if they don't know our plan. If your father knew that those two cooperate in our plan then there's no doubt that your father would punish them. Suda explained to her what's better for her maid and butler. You don't want to lose their job, right? With him saying all of this, Lumilia couldn't help but agree to him. She understood that Suda was right and she doesn't want to implicate those two in what she was going to do. Follow me, we're leaving through the main gate, Suda said as he started to walk. They couldn't jump through the wall because of Yuko, so Suda decided to leave through the main gate. The Gale group and Lumilia nodded at him. They followed behind him. After walking for a few minutes, the group arrived in front of the main gate. They haven't met any patrolling knights in their way because Suda already memorized the path they were taking and their duty, so the group arrived smoothly in front of the main gate. Currently, the group was hiding in the bushes looking at the 6 knights which were guarding the gate. Normally, only 4 knights were guarding this gate but due to the attack they slightly tightened their defense. Let's go. We'll talk to them first, if we can't then we'll take them down. Suda looked at them and said. He carefully explained his plan to them. If they failed to talk to the knights then they'll break through by force. Suda, Yuko, and the Gale group will take the knights. Suda could leave one of the knights, one each member of the Gale group, because he knew that they were not C-rank adventurers for nothing. Even if the level of these knights was higher, Suda trusted them to take care of it. After all, they were not going to become a C-rank adventurers if they were weak. Okay, John will stay with Lumilia and the man, Suda said to them. I understand. John nodded at him. Good, let's go now, Suda said as he stood up and approached the main gate. Lumilia and the rest of the Gale group simply followed him. The knights blocked their way. One of the knights have opened his mouth and said, young miss, we couldn't let you leave the mansion because there's a possibility that some people will attack you once again. I have my guards with me, there's no need to worry about me, Lumilia said to the knights. We will not let you pass here, young miss. We can't afford to trust them to protect you with their life. One of the knights said. Why? Is that my father's order? Lumilia asked the knight. Yes, young miss. Please forgive us. The knights bowed their heads and said. When they looked down they saw that the whole ground was black. Even if the light shone on it, it was still black. What's this? The knights were confused and then they saw something moving on the black ground. Several shadows burst out of the ground and bound their limbs immediately. As soon as the shadows bound them, Suda swiftly chopped the nape of the knight. He instantly knocked out a knight within a second. Brianna and the rest of the Gale group quickly moved their bodies and knocked out the knights one by one. One by one, the knights fell down on the ground without consciousness. Suda controlled the shadows so that their armor wouldn't cause a loud sound when it hit the ground. This was easier than I thought, Tider said as he wiped the sweat on his forehead. Yeah, it's because they lowered their guard, that's why they couldn't react when I cast my spell, Suda said to Tider. He then turned around and waved his hand. Several shadows burst out of the ground and it headed towards the direction of the tree on the side of the road. 3 daggers flew towards Suda's direction at high speed. Suda controlled some of the shadows and it blocked the daggers. He squinted his eyes and saw a figure flew in the sky and vanished. He managed to escape, Suda muttered, and he looked at the shadow-like tentacles that went towards that unknown person. He noticed that the shadow was sliced into tiny particles. Who the hell is that? Tider commented while looking at the direction where the unknown person disappeared. That one is powerful, Tim said. In that exchange, he managed to see a bit of that unknown person's strength. He detected that person's magic power was 2 times stronger than his magic power. Yeah, but he understood that he couldn't fight us on his own. That's why he decided to retreat. Sita nodded at Tim's words and said. He then looked at the 3 daggers that pierced his shadows. Blue-grade weapon? That person could throw away a weapon of this caliber easily. Sita thought as he pulled out the daggers. He checked these daggers and didn't find anything wrong, so he decided to keep it for himself. The shadows around him started to dissipate into the thin air as Sita cancelled his spell. A level 10 spell was really useful. A spell for binding could use for protecting himself. At level 10, he could control all the shadow-like tentacles that he made like his own body. It was easy to use it more than the other spells that he had in his arsenal. Sita shook his head and said, let's not worry about that. We should go now. You're right, Sita. Tider nodded at him. Tim and Tider, you should go now. Hurry up, fetch some carriage. Brianna said as she looked at her 2 teammates. Okay, we got it. Tider and Tim nodded at her before they started to run. Tider and Tim were going to fetch a carriage for them while Sita and the rest were going to check if someone was following them. Sita was sure that right now Lumilia's father was going to receive the news about her running away from the mansion. Of course, he knew that Lumilia's father wouldn't let her leave this place easily. After all, that fiancé of hers and father-in-law was also here in the city. He wouldn't want to lose face. That thing was what those nobles value the most. Sita was planning to use Lumilia as bait while those 2 prepared what they need to leave the city. Let's go now. Sita looked at Lumilia and the rest before he said. Let's do this. Brianna, Jane, and John nodded strongly. They were determined to help Lumilia in her problems. Also, Sita promised them a huge amount of rewards if they helped her. Lumilia was oblivious to these things. She didn't know that Sita already promised to reward the Gale group if she somehow couldn't give them money. Sita glanced at her and noticed that she was nervous. Her hands were trembling non-stop and it was pretty noticeable. Worried about it? Sita looked at her in the eyes and said. Why yes, Lumilia replied to him. Is this your first time going against your family's decision? Sita asked her in a serious tone. NN. Lumilia simply nodded her head. Sita smiled and said, don't worry about it, everything will be alright. He then patted her shoulder and added, the class rep I knew is always composed and strict, not this nervous and girly type. Lumilia started at his back as his words resonated in her head. She then took a deep breath to calm herself. Okay, let's do this. Chapter 126, Chain Quest, Let the Festival Begin. Ursus was sitting in his office while looking outside through the window. Someone really dared to send an assassin in my territory. He muttered as he tapped his finger on the table in front of him. I needed to know who is it as soon as possible. My lord. Suddenly, his assistant called him in a hurried tone. Ursus frowned as he turned his head and looked at his assistant. What is it? He asked. Young Miss left the mansion forcefully. They even brought the captured man with them. The assistant carefully explained to Ursus what really happened. That child left the mansion at this time of crisis. Ursus couldn't believe what he heard this time. Lumilia just left the mansion when there were people that were trying to kill her. Wait. Something is wrong here. Ursus stopped and realized something. He looked at his assistant and asked, you said that they brought the captured man with them, right? Yes, my lord. The assistant replied to him. Then, why would they bring that man with them? Ursus tried to think of a reason why they brought that man with them. He thought that maybe they already knew who sent those people. There's a large possibility of that, but it still didn't answer the question of why would they leave the mansion. While Ursus was thinking through things, someone knocked on the door. Ursus looked at the door and his assistant walked towards it. After checking the identity of the person, the assistant turned towards Ursus and said, my lord, Lord Gregory's subordinate is here and he's requesting an audience. Gregory. Ursus shook his head and replied, I'll allow it. Let him in. I understand, my lord. The assistant bowed his head and grabbed the handle of the door. He slowly opened it and a man wearing a silver plate armor under the dark brown hooded robe entered the room. Why are you here, Jessley? Ursus asked the man named Jessley. He knew that Jessley was Gregory's direct subordinate. Lord Ursus, here. Jessley bowed and he took out a piece of yellow paper from his robe and placed it on top of the table. Talisman. Long-distance sound transmission. Ursus recognized that the piece of yellow paper was a talisman for long-distance communication. He waved his hand and poured his mana in the talisman. The talisman emitted a yellow light indicating that Ursus activated it. Ursus opened his mouth and said, Gregory, what are you planning to do? I've heard that your daughter left your mansion. I only wanted to say that I can help you in finding your daughter. Gregory's voice sounded through the talisman. His voice seems that he found this situation amusing. How did he know about it? It's only been a minute since I've received the news about it. Ursus thought when he heard Gregory's words. He decided to keep this about himself. How about it? If you agree to it I will help you, since your daughter is the fiancée of my son. Gregory said through the talisman. Okay, I'll allow you. Ursus nodded his head as he agreed to Gregory. Thanks. I'll quickly immobilize my troops and search for them in the whole city. Also, you can keep the talisman so that I can easily report to you if I found something. Gregory said before the light in the talisman vanished. It indicates the connection between the two talismans vanished. Good day, Lord Ursus. I'll go now. Jesli bowed his head and left the room. After Jesli left, the assistant looked at Ursus and asked, My lord, why did you agree to him? I'll go with him for now. We will send people to track my daughter but also Gregory's subordinate. I wanted to know what he's planning. Ursus said as he tapped his finger in the table and looked at the talisman. He knew that Gregory wanted to marry his son to Lamilia because Gregory wanted to get a piece of that crystal flame honey. That honey was too valuable and he wanted to get on Ursus's good book. I will see it later if he's planning something, Ursus muttered in a low voice. My lord, I could only think of one reason why Lord Gregory is going to help us. The assistant opened his mouth and said. Ursus looked at him and asked, And what is it? I think it's because of that adventurer that beat his son. The assistant replied to him. What the that man? He's planning to do that to a top student of the Ladro Institute. Ursus realized it as well. He knew that Gregory was not a man to let bygones be bygones. Gregory, if you're really planning to take him out, then I wonder where did you get the guts to do so? That institute wasn't the most famous institute in the whole Hebraic kingdom for nothing. All the teachers have at least have a record of killing more than one monster that has a monster orb. That's the prerequisite requirement for becoming a teacher of Ladro Institute. The weakest teacher there was as strong as a B-rank adventurer. There's no point in getting in the bad terms with that institute. While Tider and Tim were fetching a carriage, Suda and the rest managed to leave the Asver's mansion smoothly. Suda asked Brianna and John to rent a room in a random inn. After that, Suda bought a huge black robe and used it to cover Yuko's huge body. He let Yuko hide in the bushes at the side of the road while Suda, Jane, and Lamilia went inside the room that Brianna and John rented through the window. They didn't let anyone see Lamilia. Also, Suda didn't let anyone saw Yuko hide in the bushes because it would reveal their identity. He knew that the knights would just need to ask someone if they saw a huge bear and they would instantly locate their place. Why would Suda bother himself in going inside the room through the window? It was because even if the knights asked the owner of the inn, the owner only knew that two people were inside that room. Also, the owner wouldn't forget that John and Brianna was a man and woman, so they would misunderstand what they were doing inside the room. But Suda knew that all of this wasn't enough. This plan could only buy him a few minutes as he knew that his plan was full of holes. But this was the only thing that he could think right now in this situation. We'll leave this place soon. Suda looked at them and said. Yeah, we'll wait until Tider and Tim get a carriage. Brianna nodded at him. I just hope they complete their task as soon as possible, Suda said. He then stood up from his seat and looked at the window. Lamilia looked at him and she opened her mouth. What about Yuko? She asked. Her? She's okay for now. Suda replied to her. He lifted up his hand and opened the window. I'll check the things outside for a while, so wait for me here. He said before he jumped outside through the window. Suda went on the rooftop of the inn and looked around the vicinity. He saw the Adventurers Guild building. Suda's figure vanished and reappeared in the next house before he once again disappeared. After a few seconds, he was on the top of the Adventurers Guild building. This building was the tallest in the area, so he could clearly saw the whole place. He frowned and saw a group of knights were asking the people around this place if they saw them. He then heard a familiar sound in his mind. Quest 1 completed. You've received 1000 EXP, 2 free attribute points, and 1 skill point. Quest 2 unlocked. Lamilia Quest 2, defend against the elite knights of the Asver's family and Vidrato family. Rewards, 20,000 EXP, 7 free attribute points, and 5 skill points. Suda's brows knitted together while reading the Quest 2 of Lamilia's chain quest. Elite Knight. This is going to be a problem, Suda said in a low voice. He knew that an elite knight was a powerful knight at the level of a C-rank adventurer. If it's one elite knight then it's not a problem for him, but to think that a group of elite from the two noble families were going to hunt them down. So that's why this quest have the reward of 5 skill points. Suda nodded to himself and understand that fighting elite knights from the two noble families was worth 5 skill points. And this is just the quest 2, then I wonder if those family head will make a move in person in quest 3. Suda squinted his eyes and he looked up in the sky. The sky was clear and he could clearly saw the shape of the moon. Defend. Then, they were going to attack Suda's group. If that's the case, Suda will initiate the attack first. After a few moments, he smirked and he stood up. Okay, let this city become the battlefield. You people wanted to fight, me too, I wanted to fight stronger people that could give me high rewards. Boom. His magic power flared up to the peak and it shook the entire building. Every people in the area noticed the outburst of his mana. They looked up and saw him. Come, brave knights of the Asveres and Vidrato family. Show me what you've got and let me complete my quest so that I could get that 5 skill points. He thought as his hands trembled in excitement. Siddha opened his arms widely and grinned while looking down at the masses below him. Let the festival begin. The roof beneath Siddha's feet turned into black and it spread quickly. Several tentacle-like shadows burst out of the ground. Chapter 127, Chain Quest, Killing the Knights from Vidrato Family. Siddha decided to not wait for the knights to attack them. He will be the one to initiate it. Siddha grinned and several tentacle-like shadows emerged from the ground. All the people in the area noticed the spike of his mana including Lumilia, Brianna, John, and Jane. They opened the window and looked outside. They saw Siddha on top of the Adventurers Guild with a grin on his face while looking down on the masses. Around him were several shadows that were moving slowly. What the hell is he doing? Brianna shouted and she looked around only to find that the knights were focused on Siddha. She frowned and turned to Lumilia. Mrs. Veers, we're going to help Siddha so stay here for a while. She then looked at John and Jane. Let's go, you two. Brianna then jumped through the window and the two followed her. Lumilia sighed and looked at around the room. The unconscious man that Siddha took was still here. She decided that she'll guard this man until Siddha and the rest finished what they were doing. Yuko, who was hiding in the bushes, lifted up her head when she felt her owner's magic power. She wouldn't forget this magical signature. It was from the one and only master of hers. Mew. She thought that it was the signal to come to where her owner is. She slowly moved her limbs and went out of the bushes. She then looked at the direction where she felt Siddha's magic power before she ran towards it at full speed. Siddha gathered the attention of every people in the area, including those knights from the two noble families. Of course, they recognized Siddha's face and looks. He was one of the adventurers that Lumilia hired. What the hell is that boy doing up there? Is there some show here? I don't know, but I heard he mentioned festival starting today. I don't know, but he looks suspicious. Yeah, and the thing is he's standing on top of the Adventurers Guild. The people started murmuring to each other about Siddha. They talked about all kinds of things they could think of regarding Siddha. Siddha slowly opened his mouth and said, Go, we'll create a party right now. The shadows around him flew straight towards every knight in the area. Everyone was shocked when they saw Siddha launched an attack against several people. The knights managed to repel his shadows using their sword, but some of the knights got caught up. Break. Siddha said as he closed his palm and the shadows around the knights tightened. It crushed the bones in their arms and legs. A bone-cracking sound echoed in the whole area. The whole area was silent as the people were shocked when they saw what did Siddha do to those knights that he caught. After a few seconds, a woman screamed and ran away from the scene while holding her head. Ah! Help! Her scream became the trigger that snapped everyone out of their daze. They started to panic as everyone ran in all directions with hurried footsteps. These are just ordinary knights. Where are the elite knights? Siddha muttered while looking at the knights below him. The thing was that these knights were from the Asveres family. That's why he couldn't kill them. He didn't have any plan to kill a knight from Lumilia's family. He would only knock them out or injured them to the point that they wouldn't be able to fight him again. Well, either way, the wounds that he gave them could be healed using a tier 2 healing spell. Siddha bent his knees and flew towards the west using air walk. He was absolutely calm right now as he got carried away and started a fight before the Adventurers Guild. He didn't want to bother those folks in case the branch guild master appeared. As long as he didn't bother the Adventurers Guild, it would be fine even if he rampaged throughout the city. He didn't want to be demoted to E rank. Also, he was sure that the Gripen city's adventurers already knew him because he was quite a famous adventurer right at the moment. A demi with red fur bear. So he thought that they would give him some space while doing a quest here in the city. By giving him space means that they wouldn't bother him. He's trying to escape. One of the knights shouted while looking at Siddha. Follow him. Don't let him escape. The knights followed Siddha, but some of them stay in this place to help their fallen comrades. Siddha glanced at them and he didn't increase his speed so that they could catch up to him. He continued ran until he was 500 meters away from the inn that he rented. On his way, the knights that were following him increased in numbers. Right now, more than 30 knights were following him. 12 of these knights were from Asveres family while the rest came from Vidrato family. He could differentiate them because of the difference in armor design and the crest. Suddenly, Siddha stopped moving and he just stood straight in one of the rooftops of the houses in this area. There were still those ignorant people that were watching the knights and Siddha from the sideline. Siddha looked down at the knights and said, "Let's stop playing tags. From now on let's fight seriously." Several shadows emerged from the ground and it flew towards the direction of the knights at high speed. The knights knew this spell so they easily repelled the shadows but none of them managed to cut it in half. Suda then stomped his feet on the roof and cast Shadow Spike. The spike burst out of the roof and it continued to spread until it reached the position of the knights. Jump! One of the knights shouted while looking at the spikes that were rising up from the ground. The knights didn't have a choice but to jump in the air to avoid the spikes on the ground. Suddenly, they saw Suda in front of them in the mid-air. What? They were surprised to see him appeared in front of them in an instant. Vidrato family. I will annihilate you. The corner of Suda's mouth stretched out into a smirk. He grabbed his sword and used the Crimson Moon skill. The three knights from Vidrato family were sliced in half. They were the ones closest to Suda so they couldn't react in time when Suda activated his skill. The knights on the back barely blocked his attack. They received wounds on their bodies as they couldn't completely block that attack. These knights were just normal knights. They didn't have enough power to compete to the C-rank adventurers. Suda and the knights landed on the ground. He cancelled his spell as he didn't want to waste any more mana. Although he has mana potions in his pocket, he still wanted to save it for the upcoming battles with the elite knights. Suda looked at the knights and said, "Come, I will take all of you." The knights looked at Suda and they raised their sharp swords. They were wary of him as they saw him killed 3 knights easily. "If you're not going to come then I will," Suda said as he charged towards the nearest knight on his left side. In just a second, he appeared in front of the Vidrato family knight. The knight was slightly surprised at this but he quickly regained his composure and slashed his sword towards Suda. Suda shifted his body sideways and the sword passed beside him before he grabbed the wrist of the knight. He then stabbed the Vidra sword in the knight's chest. "I'm sorry if you want to blame someone then blame that lord of yours for trying to kill Yuko," Suda said before he waved his sword and the knight was sliced into 2. "Ah!" Suda heard a shouted behind him. He quickly turned his head and saw 3 knights charged at him in unison. He looked at the crest in the chest part of their armor and saw that they were from the Asver's family. Cat speed and triple muscle strengthening Suda activated the combat arts that could temporarily increase his power and speed. The 3 knights arrived in front of him and immediately slashed their swords. Suda simply blocked all of their attacks with his sword. He moved swiftly as he appeared behind the 3 knights and threw a powerful punch in the face of one of the knights. He then lifted up his feet and swept them all using his feet. The 3 knights flew and crashed on the ground. Suda chased after them as he wouldn't give them a chance to recover. He knocked them out one by one using his fist. He wouldn't kill the people from Lumilia's family, only have one target this time. It was to decrease the force of the Vidrato family by killing all the knights that they sent after him. "Let's see, if you're going to make a move after I kill all of your subordinates," Suda muttered with a smirk on his face while looking at the rest of the knights around him. Chapter 128, Chain Quest, Elite Knights. Suda swept his eyes at the remaining knights around him. He counted their numbers and found that the number of knights was 23. 15 of them came from the Vidrato family while the rest were from Asver's family. The civilian already left this area when the battle between Suda and the knights started a few minutes ago, so right now they were the only people in this place except for the few ones that choose to stay. Suda guessed that the one that stayed here have some power to protect themselves. They have the confidence to do that, that's why they choose to stay in this place. He clenched his fingers around the handle of his sword and he slightly bent his knees. Suda was about to charge towards the knights of the Vidrato family when an oppressive aura hit him. They finally arrived. Suda muttered as he turned his head and saw 2 groups of knights. They were the elite knights of Vidrato and Asver's family. They were emitting a powerful aura that could rival his own. It's legit. They really are powerful to the point that each one of them could rival my own. Suda smiled while looking at these newly arrived knights. The elite knights of Asver's family had 5 people in their group while the Vidrato family have 7 members. This number is sufficient to take me down but the Gale group will arrive here soon. I just have to hold on for a few minutes. Suda thought while observing the elite knights. It's quite lucky that they didn't send out more of them. The 2 families only sent out 1 squad. But they wouldn't be able to take me down easily. Suda smirked as he circulated his mana around his body and he tightly gripped the Vidra sword in his hand. There's no need to hold back. Suda cast agility boost and strength boost on himself. He then stomped his feet on the ground and several tentacle-like shadows emerged. The knights quickly pulled their sword and tried to cut down the shadows. But they didn't manage to. The shadows were tougher than they imagined, they didn't think that they couldn't cut those shadows. After finding out that they couldn't cut the shadows, the knights quickly moved their bodies and jumped away. Quickly restrain him. One of the elite knights of the Asver's family shouted. 2 of his comrades used their combat arts that could increase their power and speed. In an instant, the 2 of them appeared in front of Suda. Both of them slashed their swords at him. Suda stepped back and raised his sword to block their attacks. Suda was pushed back as he felt the power from that attacks. Then, the Vidra sword emitted a red aura. Without wasting any seconds, Suda used the Crimson Moon skill. The two knights already anticipated it when they saw the red aura around the sword, so they managed to avoid the skill. Suddenly, black spikes emerged from the ground. It was about to pierce the body of the two knights when the spike broke into tiny particles. What? Suda was surprised when he saw this. He jumped backward to gain some distance and he looked around. He saw one of the knights in the was cast a spell. Light barrier. The knight muttered while looking at Suda. The shadow attribute spell was weak to light and holy attribute spells. So a level 1 shadow spike broke immediately when it made contact with the light barrier. Really, the difficulty increased when a knight that could use light attribute spell appeared. Suda thought while glancing at the knight that could use light attribute spell. It seems that he needed to prioritize eliminating this knight. But the problem was that this knight came from the Asver's family, so he couldn't kill him. Suda squinted his eyes and glanced at the elite knights of the Vidrato family. These knights were just watching him and the knights from Asver's family. He wondered why they didn't attack him up until now. Just what are they planning? Suda thought. The group of elite knights that Asver's family sent has 5 members. The 2 knights were 10 meters away from Suda while the remaining 3 were in the back. One of the knights in the back stepped forward and asked, "Where's young Miss Lamilia? Where did you hide her?" The knight frowned when he saw that Suda just glanced at him and remained silent. "Do you know that it's a crime to kidnap a daughter of a noble?" The knight said in a loud voice. Suda smiled when he heard the words of the knight. He said, "So you're saying that it's fine if it's not a noble?" "I didn't say it." The knight gritted his teeth. "Fine, but you know that I'm just following the order of your young miss," Suda said, and he opened his arms. "You know, I'm an adventurer and I will always follow what the quest that I've taken, and right now your young miss wanted to leave the city." Suda recalled something, so he added, "But I'm not an assassin that will do everything for money. Money couldn't make me move, but it's a different matter when we're talking about skill points." Suda thought. "So you're saying?" The knight seemed to know what Suda was about to say. "Yeah, she doesn't want to be tied by her family. She has her own life, why must you people force her to marry someone she doesn't like?" Suda slowly said to the knight. He then shrugged his shoulder and added, "So my job right now is to let her escape from the city. Even if it means going against the whole Asver's family." The knight did while looking straight into Suda's eyes. "Who cares about that? I'm just doing my job, that's all." Suda answered back as he opened his palm as if feeling helpless. "Then, how about we pay you triple than the money that young miss paid?" The knights gave him an offer. "I'm sorry, but I'm still in the middle of my job. We will talk later after I completed this job," Suda said as he smiled. "There's no point in talking to him. My squad will handle this, so stay out of it." Suddenly, an elite knight from the Vidrato family said. The elite knight of the Asver's family looked at the one from Vidrato family and nodded. "I'll leave it in your group." He then looked at one of his comrades and said, "Ray, go back to our lord and report what this adventurer said." "Understood." The knight nodded and he quickly left the area. The elite knights of the Asver's family stepped back and currently, they didn't have a plan to attack him. Suda glanced at them and knew that they were going to wait for the order of Lamilia's father. Since they knew that Lamilia left on her own, they knew that they should report it to their lord. They don't have any idea that Lamilia's father already knew what's happening here. He just wanted to know why her daughter chose to leave the mansion. Right now, I don't need to worry about them. I need to take care of these knights from Vidrato family. Suda thought as he shifted his gaze to the elite knights of the Vidrato family. One of the elite knights of the Vidrato family stepped forward and pulled out his sword. He said, "You know our lord forbids us from killing you, but our lord also said that we have to make sure to break the bones from your limbs. Why don't you try it and see if you can really do it?" Suda smirked and he cast Shadow Bind without hesitation. Several shadows emerged from the ground and it quickly chased after the elite knights from the Vidrato family. The sword of the knight before emitted a blue light. The knight slashed it towards the tentacles like shadows. Six-fold slash. He used the combat arts and managed to repel all the shadows that were coming towards him and his comrades. The knights from the Asver's family were shocked when they saw this. They focused on the knight's face and recognized him. That's Mudun. Mudun was one of Gregory's direct subordinate. He was stronger than elite knights as his power was just a bit weaker than B-rank adventurers. To think that Lord Gregory would even send out one of his direct subordinates. The knights from the Asver's family were stunned and didn't know why Gregory sent Mudun out here. The difficulty once again became harder. "Well, that doesn't matter to me as your power is still in the realm of C rank," Suda said with a smirk, and he continued to cast spells. Even though Mudun was powerful, he still couldn't cut the shadows of the level 10 Shadow Bind spell. Only those who entered the realm of B rank or monster that formed Monster Orb could break this spell. The best he could do was to fend it off using brute force or counter it using light attribute spells. Chapter 129, Chain Quest, vs Mudun. Suda jumped backward as the 2 knights from the Vidrato family chased after him. He cast Shadow Spike but they just smashed it with their swords. Really, he couldn't use a tier 1 level 1 spell against this kind of opponent. Also, it could hardly damage the elite knights. The two knights arrived in front of Sita and slashed their swords at him. Sita quickly moved his body and barely avoided their attacks before he waved his sword at them. Crimson Moon. The two knights stopped to block Sita's skill and Sita took this chance to gain some distance away from them while casting the Shadow Bind spell. The tentacles like shadows flashed as it went towards the other 5 knights of the Vidrato family. Of course, Sita didn't forget to send some of the shadows to the 2 knights that blocked his attack. The knights scattered in the area as the shadows chased after them. They knew that they couldn't cut these shadows with their own strength. But Sita found one knight heading toward him at high speed. This knight was Mudon, one of the direct subordinates of Gregory. He had short blonde hair and blue eyes. He had sharp features that could be considered handsome in the human race. Sita gripped his sword tightly and he slashed it in front of him when Mudon appeared. Mudon reacted quickly by raising his sword to block Sita's sword. He already anticipated that Sita will slash in front when he appeared. But what happened next was something he didn't expect. His feet suddenly sunk into the ground. He glanced down and found that the concrete floor before turned into a pool of mud. Mudslide. Didn't expect it, right? Sita grinned as he used his free hand to deliver a powerful blow on Mudon's stomach. He then grabbed Mudon's arm, which was holding a sword, before Sita slashed his Vidra sword. A large cut appeared on Mudon's chest and a huge amount of blood spurted out of it. His purple-grade armor couldn't do anything against the dark-grade sword of Sita. Actually, Sita was going to cut his neck off but he changed the trajectory of his sword because he saw a 3-layered barrier that appeared on it. A small barrier like that was hard to break. The caster made it smaller because they wanted to clearly avoid being cut in that place because if they made the barrier covered Mudon's whole body, then the Vidra sword would simply shatter it like a piece of fragile glass. They sacrificed the other place so that Sita couldn't kill Mudon in an instant. What a smart move if Sita was to say it. The barrier must be the work of the other elite knights. Sita was about to stab Mudon in the chest when Mudon headbutted him. Sita staggered backward while slashing his sword but it was blocked by a barrier. The other knights controlled the barrier. Shit. Sita cursed as he used Cross Moon. The red light flashed from the sword and the barrier expanded to block it but it didn't last a second before it broke into tiny particles. But a second was enough for Mudon to get out of the pool of mud. Madam distanced himself and looked at his broken left hand. Even though he jumped away Sita still managed to get his left arm. He took a deep breath as he felt intense pain in his body. He looked at Sita and asked, "How?" He wasn't expecting to get an answer from his question. It's just that he wanted to shift his attention out of the pain he was feeling right now. His purple-grade armor was of no use when it comes to defense against Sita's sword. There's only one explanation to this, and that was Sita's sword was higher grade. There's no way that Sita's strength was higher than him because, from the earlier clash, it gave him a bit of understanding of Sita's strength. With various buffs, Sita's strength was only a bit lower than him. He circulated his mana and found that it became hard to control. He opened his eyes widely and looked at Sita. That skill before can corrupt the target's mana pool. Mudon muttered as he recalled how that skill got his arm. If he knew about this earlier then he could have dispersed that red light when it seeped into his arm using his mana. Sita took a deep breath and cast Shadow Bind. He held his forehead and felt that it was bleeding. After all, Mudon poured his mana on his forehead when he headbutted Sita before. Sita exhaled and he observed the knights of the Vidrato family. He didn't manage to kill Mudon, the strongest one among them, so he knew that they would be wary about the mudslide spell. That was careless on my part. Sita thought. Luckily, they still didn't know about the Shadow Ball spell so he would only use it when he got another opportunity to kill Mudon. Mudon looked at his comrades and said, "Be careful when you got close to him." He had a spell that could turn the concrete floor into a mud. "Yes, sir." The knights answered him in a loud voice. It's really a problem when you don't know your opponent's skill. Be wary, maybe he still have a skill that he haven't used. Mudon said to his comrades. He thought that Sita was just an ordinary C-rank adventurer, that's why he got careless and thought that they would be able to take him down easily, but he was wrong. Knight's Will, Mudon muttered as his body exerted a white aura around him. This skill could increase his attack damage and speed. Sword Aura, the sword in Mudon's hand was coated by bluish energy. This sword skill could increase the sharpness of his sword. Also, his attack damage. Lastly, Strength Reinforcement, Mudon said as he activated all the combat arts that could increase his strength. His power right now was a little bit lower than those B rank. The skill that Sita used before was problematic to a mage who used their mana in the battle as it could disrupt the flow of mana inside a person's body. Luckily, he was a knight, not a mage. Among the 50 direct subordinates of Gregory, he was one of the weakest. Because his strength was below B rank. He only became a direct subordinate of Gregory because he had the potential to reach that level of strength. Let's do this. Mudun shouted as he dashed toward Suda. Suda knitted his brows and controlled the tentacles like shadows to distract the other knights. He doesn't want them to bother him in battling Mudun because it would become a trouble if they ganged him up. He then charged towards Mudun. Suda and Mudun exchanged blows at high speed. Every time their swords collided, a spark flew out between their swords as a loud metallic sound rung in the whole area. Every second, small cuts started to appear around Suda's body. He knew that in terms of overall abilities the knight in front of him was higher than him. He couldn't do anything but defend against Mudun's barrage of attacks. Even defending was hard for him as some slipped in his guard and cut his body. Suda even tried to use the same tactic once again, but Mudun already knew it, so it didn't work. Mudun avoided all the mud that he created on the ground. Suda opened his eyes widely as another two knights appeared on his left and right side. Since he focused on trying to fight Mudun, he could hardly have a time to control the tentacles like shadows to distract the other knights. So it's not surprising that they managed to get past from his shadows. Ursus frowned when he heard the report of his subordinates. I know that my daughter left the mansion on her own, but I didn't think that it's because of the engagement. Ursus muttered as he tapped his finger on top of the table. If we annul the engagement, then Gregory would face us. I know his temperament, as he wouldn't tolerate it if my daughter is the one who broke the engagement. He valued their family face after all. But, what if Gregory's son is the one who annulled the engagement? Ursus shook his head and thought that was impossible. Gregory wanted to take some of the crystal flame honey, so he wouldn't let his son cancel the engagement. I don't want to make another enemy, so I'm going to personally visit my daughter and have a talk with her, Ursus said as he stood up from his seat. Suddenly, the door opened and his assistant came in. My lord, the captain of the city guard is here. He wanted to talk to you about the happenings in the city. Chapter 130, Chain Quest. I don't have any plans or agendas. A loud roar echoed in the whole area that shook the ground. It startled every knight, including those knights that were about to attack Suda. Mudun looked at his two comrades that stopped and he shouted, "Don't be distracted in front of an enemy." The two knights regained their composure. They bent their knees and took a distance away. But they were already too late. Two large cuts appeared on their chest. It spurted out a large amount of blood before the tentacles like shadows emerged on their feet and strangled their bodies. Suda smiled as he knew that Yuko arrived to help him in the situation. With Yuko's help, he would be able to last longer and killed some of the knights of the Vidrato family. Also, the Gale group would arrive soon, so he doesn't need to worry unless there's an unexpected thing that will appear to help the knights. Die. Suda looked at the two knights and closed his palm. The tentacles like shadows that were restraining them tightened. The two knights groaned in pain as the shadows around them tightened, threatening to crush their bodies. Free them. Mudun immediately moved his body and rushed towards Suda to save his two comrades. He jumped in the air and slashed his sword. Six-fold slash. 6 flashes of light went towards Suda at high speed. Suda looked at it and squinted his eyes. He raised his palm and several tentacles like shadows appeared. He controlled these shadows and it blocked Mudun's skill. Mudun continued to push forward the shadows that were blocking his way. His power was really great and it almost reached the realm of B rank. Suda frowned and his shadows tightened up around the two knights. He gripped his sword as he prepared himself to clash against Mudun once he passed through the shadows. It was hard to kill the elite knights than the ordinary knights that he killed before. Their body was tougher and their strength was higher, so it was hard to crush them using Shadow Bind spell, which was a spell for binding opponents. If he was a rank 3 mage, then his Shadow Bind spell would have enough to easily crush these elite knights. Suda saw the other 4 knights of the Vidrato family dashed forward to help their 2 comrades. Yuko! Suda shouted and Yuko charged towards the 4 elite knights. He knew that Yuko couldn't match that 4 elite knights on her own. At the very least, she would last 2 minutes from the 4 elite knights, and that's if she used every strength she had. Yuko roared loudly and she used her trait skill. She opened her mouth widely and a ball of flames formed. It spun like a razor before it expanded. She used the trait skill that she gained as a red fur bear. It was a powerful attack and an AoE skill. The flames spread wide enough to the point that the 4 elite knights have no choice but to face her skill. They couldn't avoid the flames because of its wide range. 2 of the 4 elite knights turned around. They used combat arts to increase their defense before placing a barrier in front of them. They used combat arts because even if the barrier collapsed, they still have protection around them. They were going to defend against Yuko's trait skill while the other 2 knights will rescue their comrades. The flames hit the barrier they erected and they endured it for their comrades. Suda opened his left palm and a black ball formed on top of it. He then cancelled the shadow bind that was holding Mudun. Mudun was surprised when the tentacles like shadows suddenly vanished into thin air, but he quickly regained his composure as he saw Suda threw a black ball of energy in front of him. He reacted quickly by shifting his head to the side and the black ball of energy passed beside his head. As expected of him. He still managed to avoid it in that range. Suda thought and he waved his sword towards Mudun. Mudun also swung his sword and both of their swords collided, causing sparks to flew between their swords. Suda and Mudun pulled back their swords before they clashed once again. They were so fast that every time they swung their swords it was followed by a gust of wind. Just like last time, Mudun suppressed Suda in sword fights. Suda's sword mastery was level 3 and Mudun was suppressing him. It means that he was higher than Suda in terms of pure sword skills. It's just that Suda has an advantage in basic attacks like this. The added damage of his sword mastery skill stacked up with his corruption traits. That's why he could damage Mudun even with normal attacks. Plus, the sharpness of the Vajra sword Saya was higher than any sword. If not for all of this, Suda wouldn't be able to hurt someone at Mudun's level, who was clearly above him, with his normal attacks. Every second, small cut appeared on Suda's body. The blue-grade leather armor that he was wearing was tattered. Sir Mudun, we've managed to rescue them. The two knights shouted as they managed to rescue the knights from the tentacles like shadows. Good, Mudun muttered as he smiled and slashed his sword at Suda. Good. Suda also smiled at Mudun as the sword an inch closer to his face. But something unexpected happened. His sword slashed the thin air as Suda vanished in front of him. What the? Mudun was stunned. He recalled Suda's smile. Teleportation spell, but he was looking at him when he vanished. Mudun thought as he tried to figure out how did Suda vanished. A tier 1 teleportation spell called Blink was a spell that could teleport the user to a dozen meters away from his position. Also, he could only teleport to the place that he was looking at. But Suda was looking straight at Mudun's eye, so it was impossible to use Blink. It only means that Suda used different teleportation spells. Mudun recalled the black ball of energy that Suda threw before. Damn. Then, he's targeting my subordinates. Mudun thought as he gritted his teeth and he turned around. Ugh. He felt a warm feeling forming in his mouth. He looked down and saw Suda's sword on his chest. Mudun groaned and spat a mouthful of blood. He looked up and saw Suda was grabbing two of his comrades in their neck. Slowly, the tentacles like shadows rose up from the ground. It slowly strangled the bodies of the two knights. Let them go. Mudun said as blood flowed down from his mouth. He then raised his hand and grabbed the sword that was on his chest. He was about to pull it out when he felt something. He fell on his knees as he felt his heart thump wildly. The world he was seeing was slowly turning around and his whole body was slowly going numb. What's happening to me? Mudun said with great effort. The temperature of his body was rising and then it will go down. He gritted his teeth and lifted up his head. He looked at Suda with clear anger in his eyes. Suddenly, his vision turned completely red like a blood. He felt intense pain coming from his eyes and it followed up by blood flowing out of it. Mudun screamed as he held his head using both of his hands. He then heard a female voice whispering beside him. Give your body to me and you will not feel any of this pain. I assure you in my name that you will no longer feel pain once you entrust your body to me. Get the hell out of my head. Mudun screamed as he continued to hear the voice of a woman in his head. Suda turned around when he heard Mudun's loud voice. So that how it is? A smile appeared on Suda's face while looking at Mudun. He then closed his palm and the shadows tightened around the bodies of the two knights behind him. A loud cracking sound echoed behind him. The shadows crushed all the bones of the two knights and killed them. Suda ignored it as he walked towards Mudun. You know, there's a crazy will inside that sword so you shouldn't have hold it, Suda said before he grabbed the handle of the Vajra sword Saya and pulled it out. He looked at the sword and said, you've unconsciously activated the possession skill when you hold it, or maybe the will inside the sword help you. Just what are you planning, Saya? Suddenly, a voice rung inside Suda's mind. Yufufu, I'm just helping you defeat him. I don't have any plans or agendas. Suda didn't expect that the Vajra sword Saya would reply to his words. It was truly unexpected that it caught him off guard. I'll worry about you later. He shook his head and looked at Mudun who was breathing heavily. Chapter 131, Chain Quest, Quest 3. Suda looked down at Mudun who was gasping for air. It seems that the Vajra sword Saya broke him down. He noticed that veins were popping out of Mudun and blood was flowing out of his eyes. You don't have a system like me that could use the equipment skill of weapon as soon as I wield it. You don't have any idea that you activate the possession skill of the Vajra sword. Suda thought while looking at Mudun's pitiful appearance. I won't let you suffer anymore, Suda said in a cold tone as he slowly raised his sword. I don't want to die. Mudun muttered as he gripped something from his chest. It was a pendant that has a picture of his family. He recalled the face of his wife, daughter, and his 2-year-old son. He didn't think that this would become his last mission. Claire, Cindy, Romy, I'm SOR-. He didn't even manage to finish his sentence as Suda swung his sword. Mudun's head flew in the mid-air and it splattered blood on the ground. You've received 4,613 EXP for defeating Elite Knight Mudun. Suda sighed when he heard the system prompt in his head. When Mudun said the name of his family members, Suda hesitated for a moment there. I just hope that you don't confront me in your next life, Suda muttered to himself. He was going to take down everyone that blocked his path, and there's no exception to it, even if you have families or not. Suda wasn't an entirely evil person, even he still has humanity in his heart. Even if it's just a little amount of kindness, Suda treated a few selected individuals with affection. Well, that individuals can be counted in both hands. Yuko. Who else? I think I will include class rep next to Yuko. Suda thought as he looked at his hands. He then shook his head and put those unnecessary thoughts in the back of his mind. He crouched down and grabbed the pendant on Madun's neck before he yanked it off. If I met your family, then I will give them a special service of mine. If they're lacking money, then I'll give it to them. Suda said to Madun's corpse before he turned around. He recalled the quest that he received in the desolate woods. He still has to complete, but he doesn't have any idea where he would start in this huge continent. He saw that Yuko managed to defeat the two elite knights because of shock when they saw how Suda killed Madun. She received a few injuries on her body while she was fighting the two elite knights. The remaining two elite knights were looking at Madun's headless body with widened eyes. They couldn't believe what happened before their very own eyes. After a few moments, both of their mana burst out of their bodies as they recklessly charged towards Suda. "Ahh! I'll kill you!" They screamed at the top of their lungs. They waved their swords at Suda, aiming to slice his neck. Too predictable. You think that you would be able to kill me when you're just charging at me without any sort of plan? Suda said to the two elite knights while closely avoiding all of their attacks. The two knights let their emotion overcome them and they recklessly waved their sword at him. They didn't have any proper form, so how would they caught Suda in that situation? Suda sighed when he saw them didn't listen to his words. The Vajra sword in his hand emitted a red light. Suda moved his body forward while dodging the attacks of the two elite knights before he waved his sword. The heads of the two elite knights flew in the mid-air before it landed on the ground with a loud sound. Normally, two elite knights would be hard to kill at his current level, but they lost their composure, so Suda managed to kill them easily. You've received 3,507 EXP for defeating an elite knight. You've received 3,289 EXP for defeating an elite knight. Suda looked down and examined his body. He didn't receive any grave injuries, so he could fight another big battle. Yuko approached Suda and lowered her head in front of him. Suda looked at her and he lifted up his palm. He then placed it on her forehead and used light heal to close the cuts that she received. He thought that he should try to get the spell that would let him heal himself. An advanced version of light heal. If he wasn't wrong, he remembered that the top 5 ranker Aileen Karnane used this spell. I will try to get it in the institute, Suda muttered. Then he shifted his attention and looked at the elite knights of the Asver's family. These knights backed down when he said that Lumilia left the mansion on her own. They also simply watched him kill the elite knights of the Vidrato family. He doesn't know if they have any plans, but at this time, he heard a familiar sound in his mind. Quest 2 complete. You've received 20,000 EXP, 7 free attribute points, and 5 skill points. Suda nodded in satisfaction when he saw that he leveled up when he received the rewards from the quest. He finished this quest without receiving heavy injuries and he was glad at that. Before, when he triggered a quest with 5 skill points as a reward, it was a quest to snatch the mystical light cherry. That quest was hard because of the monster that was guarding the cherry, but it was killed by the commandments. To think that the appearance of a commandments would raise the rewards of the quest. If it was a quest to escape from the commandments, then the rewards would be more than 20 skill points. But it was a different matter if it was a quest to defeat the commandments. Quest 3 unlocked. Lumilia Quest 3, don't let the knights capture Lumilia. Protect her at all costs until you leave the city. Time limit, 30 minutes, rewards, 25,000 EXP, 10 free attribute points, and 7 skill points. Note, if Lumilia didn't manage to leave the city within the time limit, you will fail the quest as the city guards will intervene. Suda carefully read the quest that he received this time. 7 skill points. He thought this quest would become the hardest quest that he triggered. There's also a note and time limit, so it means that either the Asver's family or Vidrato family will make a large-scale move to stop Lumilia from leaving the city. Also, it means that Tider and Tim finished their task in getting a carriage. I need to go to Lumilia as soon as possible. Suda muttered as he looked up and saw the knights of the Asver's family looking at him. But he felt something wrong around him. He heard Yuko growled beside him, so he looked around and saw dozens of knights arrived at the scene. The group of knights consists of elite knights and ordinary knights. Their number exceeded 50 people. 30 of it were just ordinary knights while the rest were elite knights. To think that man would send out this force, Suda said as he smiled wryly. He saw that the crest on the chest part of the armor was the crest of the Vidrato family. It seems that Gregory really hated him to send this much force. Get ready, Yuko. We're going to break through and go to class rep. Suda said as he took out a blue bottle from his pocket. He removed the bottle cap and drank the mana potion to restore some of his mana, He then took out a red bottle. He also drank it like the mana potion. This red potion was a health potion that could recover his health points. Ho! Suda exhaled as he felt a warm feeling inside his body. The cuts on his body were closing rapidly until he felt that all the small cuts on his body were gone. Okay, I'm ready to fight another battle. Suda smirked and tightly gripped the Vajra sword in his hand. He observed the knights and his mana flared up. The knights were looking at Suda and then they made a way as a middle-aged man with long blue hair stepped forward. He was exuding a fierce aura of a veteran fighter that experienced countless battles. The knights of the Asvers family bowed their heads when they saw the middle-aged man. My lord. All of them said at the same time. My lord. Suda thought, then he realized who this man. Don't tell me. He didn't think at all that this man would appear before him. Chapter 132, Chain Quest, I don't have any choice. Why the hell is Lemilia's father here? Suda thought as he tightened his guard and observed Ursus's movements. Gur. Yuko growled at Ursus as her instinct was telling her that Ursus was a very dangerous person. She walked in front of Suda and looked at Ursus with an angry expression. Suda patted Yuko's head and told her that it was fine. She didn't have to protect him. Suda then looked at Ursus and said, I'm sorry to tell you that class rep is not here. Ursus simply looked at him and didn't say anything to him. Suda felt like he was a prey standing in front of a top predator and that said predator was looking at him. He felt being oppressed just by standing in front of Ursus von Asvers. The man who managed to get a crystal flame honey from the powerful monster. Suda knew the locations where the honey can be found. The closest to this kingdom was the mountain between Hebre Kingdom and Zomas country. The monsters that could produce the crystal flame honey were the Colossus burning bees. These monsters were already at 3rd evolution, which means that their level was above level 40. To think that Ursus managed to snatch a bottle of honey from more than 100 bees means that he was above level 60. He was a man that could go toe-to-toe with a monster that undergoes 4th evolution such as the queen bee of the Colossus burning bees. But it's only Suda's speculation as there's a possibility that Ursus was stronger. The difference in power is too large. Buff spell and combat arts are no use. Suda thought. It was at this time that Ursus opened his mouth and said, I already know where my daughter is and my knights are already on their way to surround the inn. Suda was stunned when he heard those words. If that's really the case, then he should hurry up and go to Lemilia to prevent the knights from capturing her. Then, why are you here? Do you want to fight me, a junior? Suda asked and thought that Ursus would personally capture him. No, you're 10 years early to fight me. You're not at my level. Ursus shook his head. Oh. 10 years. I've played the Battle Worlds online for 10 years and become one of the commanders of the mechanic country. I could easily defeat a single noble head like you when I'm blood. Suda thought and he felt amused at what Ursus said. Right now, he doesn't have a level cap, so he was sure that he would get stronger than blood within just a few years of time. He doesn't need 10 years at all. Ursus once again opened his mouth and said, I won't fight you as I don't want that enormous institute to chase me. I came here because I wanted to see the power of the strongest first-year student of that institute. After all, my daughter praised you a lot. Suda already knew it. Lemilia said that she revealed that he was a top student of the Ladro Institute to Gregory and her father to prevent Gregory from taking revenge. He then looked at the dead bodies of the elite knights around Suda and added, I visited that institute a few times ago, and from what I saw that you're really the strongest first-year students, as you're clearly stronger than you're the previous batch but not the current top one. It seems that you're just here to watch me defeat these knights. Suda smirked and said as he looked at the knights of the Vidrato family. He was only joking as he knew that with his current power it was impossible to defeat all these knights and elite knights. That's impossible, just let yourself be captured so that you wouldn't experience hardship, Ursus said as he looked at Suda. Oi! Did you know that defeating them and escaping from them is a different matter? So did you really think that they will manage to capture me? Suda said with a smile. He knew the truth that even escaping from the elite knights of Vidrato family was hard for him. Against this much number, it was hard to escape, much more defeating them. Then, a man with a terrifying aura stepped forward. He was holding a sword and looked at Suda with rage. You, how dare you kill my junior? He said as his face contorted in anger. He was also a direct subordinate of Gregory. The 5 of Gregory's subordinates came here in the city with Gregory and one of them died while chasing one adventurer. His name was Aldine Gropus. A powerful knight of the Vidrato family. He was a tall man with short brown hair and black eyes. He had a scar on his left cheek that made his appearance look fierce. He couldn't take it all. He wanted to rip Suda apart. Right now, he was with Food, one of the direct subordinates, to capture Suda. Food was a man with average height. He had a lazy look on his face. He had black cat ears and tails. He stepped forward and stood beside Aldine. He looked at Suda with those lazy eyes. Are they the leader of this squad? Suda wondered while looking at these two knights. Aldine and Foot then released their energy with a powerful momentum that shook the ground beneath them. A huge gust of wind swept out and it blew the dust in the area around them. This. Suda opened his eyes widely when the two direct subordinates released their aura. These two auras were clearly stronger than Madun. This made the escape more difficult. That's why I said that you wouldn't be able to escape, Ursus said as he turned around and started to walk away. He was going to wear his daughter. I don't have any choice but to use this, Suda said as he took out a bottle with orange liquid from his pocket. The smile on his face vanished and it was replaced by a cold expression. Yuko, I will handle them. You can watch me on the sideline. Suda said as he patted Yuko on top of her head. Yuko looked at him with a worried expression before she followed his order. She stood behind him as watched her owner took the cap of the bottle. Suda threw the bottle cap on the side and he took a deep breath. Aldine wanted to rush towards Suda but Foot grabbed his wrist. He looked at Foot and asked, why? Foot shook his head and said, my instinct as a cat person is telling not to approach that man. You will be in trouble if you approached him carelessly. You're right. He's the one who killed Madun after all. Aldine nodded his head. He took a deep breath to calm himself and he started to activate all the combat arts that could increase his power. Power Strike, Piercing Reduction, Reinforce Recovery, Knight's Will, Body Power ×3. Foot looked at Aldine who was preparing himself and shook his head. He looked at Ursus and asked, Lord Ursus, can I ask something before you leave? Ursus turned around and looked at Foot. Tell me. Foot glanced at Suda and asked, Lord Ursus, do you have any idea what that potion is? Ursus squinted his eyes and looked at the potion in Suda's hand. Orange liquid? I can't think of any potion that possessed that color, but I have a bad feeling about this. Ursus said then something came into his mind. In this era, there's no current orange potion but in the last. Don't tell me. It seems that you've guessed it correctly. This is a monster potion that I found in an underground base. Suda said as he drank the orange liquid from the small bottle. This was the monster potion that Suda found in the underground base when he was completing the quest to acquire the dark-grade weapon Vajra sword Saya. The ground shook as Aldine charged towards Suda at a very fast speed. He opened his palm and tried to grab Suda's face. Aldine's speed was so fast that he covered a distance of 50 meters in an instant. Suda lifted up his head and looked at Aldine in the eyes who was just an inch closer to him. Suddenly, something exploded from inside Suda's body. A huge powerful energy came inside his body and it swept out the whole area. It was a powerful burst of energy and it pushed Aldine away from Suda. The energy became so dense that everyone could see it with their own eyes. The mana that Suda was emitting was really terrifying. Its bluish color slowly turned into a blood-red color. The atmosphere became heavy as everyone felt the pressure in the air. A legendary potion from 1000 years ago that could let the user borrow the monster's special energy. The monster potion from the legend. Ursa said while looking at Suda. But do you really think that there's no side effect in using that kind of potion? Chapter 133, Chain Quest, Monster Potion. What the hell is this? Aldine was shocked when he saw this. Not just him, everyone was feeling the same as his. A potion from legends. Foot muttered when he heard Ursus' words. Arg. Suda screamed as he started to emit the beast energy around his body. The beast or best Faram was contradicting the mana inside his body and it was extremely painful for Suda. Converting mana into beast energy. Processing. Damn. It hurts. Suda screamed at the top of his lungs. His veins were popping on his forehead and neck. He didn't hear the system prompts that rung in his head. It felt like someone was eating him from the inside. Blood started to flow down from his mouth. Suda then felt a burning sensation inside his body. It became too hot that he felt that he was inside a huge oven. The excruciating pain that he felt from converting his mana was unbearable. In the end, the mana inside his body disappeared and it was replaced by a berserk beast energy. With a powerful wave, Suda's body exerted an energy wave in the surrounding area as it successfully converted all the mana inside his body. All abilities have increased drastically. Attack power has increased by 3 times. Every spell will use best Faram and it will multiply the spell power by 3. Suda heard several system prompts inside his head. He ignored it and looked at the knights who were looking at him with a nervous expression. He looked down at his hand and saw a reddish energy around it. He opened and closed his palm to get himself familiarized with the beast energy. The beast energy was hard to control, unlike mana that originates from nature. Ursus looked at Suda and said, if you think that this enough, then you're underestimating Gregory. Suda looked at Ursus when he heard him say something. Suda responded by saying, you shouldn't worry about that. I will handle him when the time comes. Ursus hummed before he turned around and said, let's go. Yes, my lord. The knights of the Asvers family nodded their heads. They followed Ursus from behind. Ursus and his knights left leaving the group of knights of the Vidrato family on the site. Shit. Why the hell did he have that kind of potion? Aldine grunted as he wiped the sweat forming on his forehead. Food, the most logical one, took out a piece of yellow paper from his pocket. It was the talisman for long-distance communication, the transmission talisman. He poured his mana in it and the talisman emitted a dim yellow light. What is it? Gregory's voice sounded. My lord, the target Sudaishi showed a legendary potion that gives him the strength of the monster. Food reported what happened here to his lord. What? Gregory was surprised when he heard Foot's words. Ursus is there? And he's the one who verified the authenticity of the potion. Yes, my lord. Lord Ursus appeared here and he left the target alone. Right now, we're going to engage the target in combat. Foot said while observing Suda's movements. Right now, just how powerful is that brat? Gregory asked. Just by the aura alone, he's as strong as a monster that has a monster orb. Foot reported Suda's power level based on his observation. Level of evolution. Gregory asked a simple question. Third evolution. Foot replied after comparing Suda's aura to the monsters that he saw before. If that's the case then you and Aldine are not enough to defeat him. Gregory paused for a moment then added, call the other knights that I tasked to capture the other adventurers. I'll prevent Lumilia from leaving the city. I understand, I don't think we'll be able to hold him that long with our current strength, Foot replied to Gregory. That's enough, the effect of that potion wouldn't last that long. If you can't handle him then I'll personally take care of him after I secure Lumilia. Gregory assured Food. I understand, my lord. I'm going to cut the transmission now. Foot said as he saw that Suda was looking at him. Precisely, the talisman that he was holding. Suda looked at Foot and said, That's a transmission talisman. This type of talisman was useless to players as the system have a message and call function, so the players didn't need the talisman to communicate with each other. I'll take that. Suda said as he disappeared from his position. Foot was surprised when he couldn't follow Suda's movements with his eyes. Brace yourself, we're going to hold this man. He shouted and he felt something behind him. He followed his instinct and he crouched down. A sword passed above him and it produced a powerful shockwave. Foot looked back and he rolled his body to the side. This guy. He's planning to kill me with that strike. He said in his mind and he took out his sword. Oh. That's good. Suda praised Foot for dodging his attack. A powerful and dense beast energy covered the whole area around the knights. It suppressed the weaker energy like mana, so the knights who have low control over their mana would be able to use it properly. Arg. The heck with this, you're stronger than a monster that formed a monster orb recently. Is that really the power of the legendary potion? Foot cursed while looking at Suda. He gripped his sword and a white light covered his sword. Wind slash. He slashed his sword and a wind blade flew out. The blade went straight to Suda but a tentacle-like shadow sprouted on the ground. It blocked the skill easily. Attack him. Aldine shouted and he dashed towards Suda. He used every power that he had to launch a powerful punch. The other knights didn't stay idle as all of them launched their skills at Suda. Several shadows rose up from the ground and it covered Suda's body like a cocoon. It protected him from the skills of the knights. Suda heard several loud sounds as the skills of the knights landed on the shadows around him. He opened his palm and cast Shadow Bind spell. The whole ground turned black and it spread 100 meters diameter with Suda as the center. The knights stopped firing their skills as they saw more than 100 tentacles like shadows slowly rose up from the ground. What the hell? Foot muttered while looking at the scene. The ordinary knights lost their will to fight when they saw this. They subconsciously loosened their grip on their swords. One by one it fell on the black ground causing a metallic sound to echo in the whole area. Fear slowly seeped in their hearts and it consumed their will to fight. This is many times stronger than before. We're all going to die. They muttered to themselves while looking at the towering shadows around them. The shadows extended up to 20 meters in height and its thickness was 3 meters to the root, and it gradually thinned down to the tips of the shadows. Within the 100 meters diameter black ground, more than 100 huge shadows rose up. Each one of these shadows possessed terrifying strength that could easily crush the knights. This is the power of the Shadow Bind spell when you use beast energy instead of mana. The only problem is that it's harder to control. Suda muttered to himself. The beast energy was a dominant and berserk energy. That's why it could suppress the calm and peaceful mana. But not anyone could control this powerful energy, only the monsters have the strength to control this. In the past, a lot of humans and demis attempted to use the beast energy and a lot of them failed to do so. But not all of them failed. The result of their attempts was the monster potions and the use of some technology using beast energy. The energy that the whole city used was coming from monster orbs. It was also the fruits of countless experiments of humans and demis in the past. They succeeded in transferring the beast energy in the body of humans and demis using the potions, but there were a lot of problems. The bodies of humans and demis weren't compatible to the power of beast energy. The beast energy was trying to destroy the mana pool of the person that consumed the monster potion. That's why the side effect of this potion was that the consumer of the potion will permanently lose a portion of his mana pool. But that's okay for Suda as he was a monster in the first place. It's just that his current form couldn't handle the power of the beast energy. Second evolution monster didn't have enough strength to fully control it. The shadows opened and he peeked outside. Suda grinned and controlled the shadows. All the shadows stopped moving and it went straight to the knights. The screams of the knights echoed in the whole area as the shadows strangled their bodies. Chapter 134, Chain Quest, What are you doing here? The sounds of sword clashing echoed in the whole area. The one who's fighting here were Brianna, John, and Jane of the Gale group. Brianna, John, and Jane were fighting the knights of the Vidrato family. When they felt Suda's outburst of energy before they immediately went to help him, but on their way, a group of knights from Vidrato family blocked their way. It led to a battle between the three of them and the elite knights of the Vidrato family. They were rank C adventurers, so ordinary knights were no match to them. Banshee's cry. Jane shouted loudly and it echoed throughout the whole area. Her voice contained some mysterious voice that slows down the movements of the knights. Banshee's cry was a tier 1 spell that could slow down the target's movement speed by 20%. Damn. Be careful. This spell decreased our speed. The leader of the squad of these elite knights said to his comrades. Brianna charged forward and she waved her sword at the leader of the elite knights. Despite his movements being slowed down, the leader still managed to block her attack. Another one. Brianna didn't stop at one strike. She continued to attack the leader of the elite knights without hesitation. The leader of the elite knights passively blocked her attacks. He couldn't do anything because of the debuffs that were cast on him and the other knights. Suddenly, Brianna's sword and John's dagger emitted a white glow. Both of them weren't surprised at this. They knew who's the one behind this, and that's their comrade Jane. Increase sharpness and bleeding attack. Jane cast a spell that helped Brianna and John. She was a support type mage, so most of her spells were buffs and debuffs which could increase her comrades' fighting ability or decrease their enemies' fighting ability. Burst slash. John disappeared and he reappeared on the back of the elite knight. A large cut appeared on the chest of the elite knight and it spurted out a large amount of blood. Stealth. John slowly blended in the surroundings as he used his combat arts. He was the scout of the Gale group. An expert scout that knew the essence of it and understood the meaning of his class. He knew his weakness and understood that he wasn't fit for close combat battles. He was better of finishing enemies with a sneak attack on their blind spot. Brianna was the main damage dealer of the Gale group. The combination of her sword and speed were fearsome. She was holding every elite knight here with Jane's support. That alone was enough to say that her power was slightly stronger than elite knights. While she was holding all the elite knights, John would sneak attack the knights that leave their guards open. It's the tactic of their group with just the three of them. If Tider and Tim were here, then it would greatly change everything in this battle. Tider was the tanker of the group. The shielder class that always took the front line in every battle. He experienced a lot of life and death situations that toughened up his body. While Tim was the burst type mage of the Gale group. Unlike Jane, who only knew support spells, Tim knew different types of damage spells. AoE or burst spell that could kill any opponents at his level with just a single combination of it. They were the true rank C adventurers, and if they were in a party, the strength they would show was stronger because of their combination, so they could defeat opponents that were higher level than them. Suddenly, the ground shook heavily like an earthquake hit the whole city. It stopped the Gale group and the elite knights from fighting because of the heavy tremor of the ground. They don't have any choice but to grab on something near them to balance their footing. The Gale group and the elite knights looked up and saw towering black tentacles from far away. Then a powerful wave of energy swept out coming from that direction and it hit all of them. This. Best Faram. Jane recognized the energy that swept out in all directions. She felt the disturbance in her mana pool. Although it became weak because of the distance, she still felt it. Best Faram? Monster. Brianna glanced at Jane when she heard her mention the word Best Faram. She then looked at the direction of the huge tentacles and muttered, "Just what is happening there?" Suda is in that direction. John whispered while looking at the towering tentacles. Not just them who felt and saw it, but also Tider and Tim. Up to the gate of the city, they could clearly saw the emergence of the black tentacles that wiped out a part of that city. They saw how those tentacles smashed the huge buildings in that direction. Even at this distance, they felt a slight trembling of the ground. Really? What's that? Tider muttered in disbelief while looking at the scene. That's Suda's spell. Tim said as he recognized the black tentacles. But it somehow feels different. Well, yeah, it's different. You can also see it, right? The size. It is larger than what he showed before. Tider said to Tim as he emphasized the word size. I know that, but I'm talking that it's not mana that he is using to cast that spell, Tim said with an annoyed expression. The city lord of the Gripen city was also watching this chaotic scene with his own eyes. Report. What's happening there? The city lord opened his mouth and asked. Lord, an adventurer used monster potion according to our agent who saw it. A voice answered him from behind. This voice came from the city lord's assistant. Monster potion? The recipe of that potion is gone, but sometimes a bunch of adventurers manage to acquire it in some dungeons or ruins. The city lord muttered in a low voice. I've given Ursus 30 minutes to wrap this up. I will not intervene and the damage that they created will be paid by Ursus. That's what he promised to me. Evacuate all the civilians and don't let any of them die. I don't want someone innocent to die in this incident. The city lord said. Yes, my lord. The city guards are now evacuating the civilians from all the battlefields in the city. The assistant reported. If this doesn't end in 30 minutes, then I'll personally stop this chaos. The city lord said. Sita was standing alone on the battlefield. He cancelled the shadow bind spell and all the huge tentacles like shadows dissipated into thin air. He managed to kill all the knights of the Vidrato easily. They didn't expect this to happen at all, as they thought that they would be able to hold him, but the reality wasn't that fair to them. It's true that Sita received the best Faram from the potion that he drank, and everyone thought that he was as strong as a monster that formed their monster orb recently. But he was clearly stronger than them because of his spell. All the monster that they fought were just using their trait skills, and once they knew the monster's trait skills, they could create a plan to counter it, but Sita was using a spell. If a person used best Faram to cast a spell, then the power of the spell would multiply by 3 because of the usage of the stronger energy. It means that all of Sita's spells were currently 3 times stronger. And the knights didn't expect this at all. Before they could think it through, Sita crushed them. Blood flowed down from his mouth. Sita lifted up his hand and wiped the blood. Even though I'm a monster, my body still couldn't handle the best Faram. Sita thought as he felt a stinging pain all over his body. Yufufu, I wonder what will happen if everyone knew that you will gain this power once you evolve to a higher life form. A playful voice sounded in Sita's mind. You don't need to think about me. I will handle it when that time comes. Sita snorted, then he looked at Yuko. Plus, I think that Yuko will evolve first before me. Yufufu, that's what's scary about you. You're not afraid of those stronger than you, and you don't care about them. It feels like you are sure that you will reach their level or even surpass them someday. The playful voice replied in his head. Well, thanks for the compliment, Sita said in his mind, and he shook his head. Yufufu, what a scary monster you are. The voice in his mind giggled. It seems that you have a visitor. Sita. A voice sounded behind Sita. Sita turned his head and looked behind him. He saw a person that he didn't expect that would appear here. What are you doing here? Sita asked. Chapter 135, Chain Quest, Arrival. Lamilia was in a bad situation right now, as the Knights of Vidrato and Asver's family were around her. They didn't even leave some space for her to escape. The Knights surround the whole inn and blocked the door. Young miss, don't resist anymore. You will not gain anything from leaving the city. A young knight of the Asver's family said to Lamilia. So you're asking me to marry someone I didn't even know? Lamilia replied in a loud voice. I will not go back to the mansion no matter what happens. Then, we will use force to bring you back. The young knight said to Lamilia. Did my father order you that? Lamilia asked as she narrowed her eyes. She glanced at the window and thought about what she should do to escape from these knights. The door was blocked by the knights, and there were knights surrounding the inn from all directions. They basically cornered her. Also, the man that Sita kidnapped before was also in this room. He was still unconscious. Yes, we have no choice but to obey your father's order. The young knight said to Lamilia in an apologetic tone. I'm sorry too. Lamilia said before she cast the spell. A serpent made of water materialized and it blew the ceiling of the room. Lamilia jumped to the hole that she created on the ceiling of the room. Quick, catch young miss. The young knight shouted. They rushed inside the room and saw that it was covered in smoke. The young knight then saw the hole in the ceiling. Damn. The young miss escaped from the roof. Look out for her. Don't worry, the Lord is there, that's why I didn't position any of the knights there. The knight of the Vidrato family. By Lord, you mean? The young knight turned his head with widened eyes. Yes. The knight of the Vidrato family nodded. Lamilia landed on the roof and saw someone waiting for her on the roof. She saw a chubby man with short yellow hair and yellow color eyes. This man was none other than the head of the Vidrato family, Gregory Vidrato. Nice try, Lamilia, Gregory said with a smile. Why are you? Lamilia muttered in disbelief while looking at Gregory. She subconsciously took a step backward. Why I'm here? Of course, it's to prevent you from leaving the city. You're the fiancé of my son, after all. Gregory said as he placed his finger on his chin. Of course, there's that. I also want to see the face of that young man when his plan goes awry because of my appearance here. Gregory then shrugged his shoulder and said, he should be honored as a family head like me personally make a move just to stop his plan. He should be content about that. I'm in trouble right now. There's no way I could escape with him chasing after me. Lamilia thought as she tried to rack her brain to find a way to escape. Wait. Gregory said, and he placed his hand inside his pocket. He took out a piece of yellow paper. This paper was emitting a dim yellow light. What's wrong, Food? Gregory asked. He talked to the person from the other side of the talisman while looking at Lamilia. After a while, they finished talking and Gregory placed back the talisman in his pocket. Tisk. I miscalculated. To think that Brad have something like that? Foot and Aldine aren't enough to capture him. I should have brought Greeno instead of these trashes. Greeno could even kill a monster with a monster orb alone. Gregory said in an annoyed tone. He then took a deep breath and added, well, it doesn't even matter. Even if he have that power boost, he still couldn't match me with that strength. Lamilia listened to their conversation the whole time. Well, she couldn't avoid it as their voice was loud as if they were telling her to listen to them. So she clearly understood that Sudha used some potion to boost his power to the next level. She also heard that her father has appeared before Sudha. Really, this was getting more complicated and difficult. There was also the city guard. She was wondering what happened to the city guard, why they didn't appear until now. She didn't know that her father already talked to the city lord about this. While they were thinking some things, a burst of powerful energy interrupted them. It gathered everyone's attention. Suddenly, they heard a loud booming sound and it was followed by a small earthquake. What the hell? Gregory said in an annoyed tone as his brows tightened together as he turned his head and looked behind him. Lamilia looked at the distance where she heard the booming sound and saw the gigantic black tentacles that were larger than normal houses. She was on the rooftop so she could clearly see it, and also thanks to the moonlight she could see the black tentacles at night. That's Sudha's spell. Lamilia murmured and she glanced at Gregory. She slowly took a step backward but she found that her feet were frozen. In an instant, I didn't even saw him cast a spell. Lamilia thought as she tried to break free but a sudden chill hit her body. The ice on her feet started to spread across her legs. She couldn't even move her body. So this is the power of the head of the Vidrato family. Lamilia thought as she gritted her teeth. I'm going to let you sleep for a while, Gregory said while still looking at the dissipating huge tentacles. He didn't even bother looking at Lamilia. Come here, take Lamilia and I'll take care of that brat. How dare he killed my subordinates. The knights of the Vidrato family one by one appeared on the rooftop of the inn. Handle her with care. She's my son's fiancée. Gregory said. Yes, my lord. The knights nodded their heads. Gregory felt the talisman in his pocket vibrated. He took it out and asked, what's wrong, Food? What happened there? But the one who replied to him wasn't Food at all. It was a completely different person. Hello, by Food, you mean the knight? He already left and give this to me. A voice of an unfamiliar man sounded in the talisman. Who the hell are you? Gregory asked in an angry tone. His aura was leaking out of his body. He then recalled the only person that could steal the talisman from Food in that place. Don't tell me you are. Ding dong. Correct. I'm Sudha Ishii, rank D adventurer at your service. Well. Prepare yourself. I'm coming over there. Sudha's voice sounded happy but it slowly turned cold over the end. Ha ha ha. You're so funny. Gregory laughed when he heard Sudha's words. Do you really think that you could defeat me with your power boost? I've already killed dozens of monsters that have monster orb on my own and you're weaker compared to them, so how are you going to defeat? I can't answer your question but well it will work out in the end, Sudha said. While Gregory was talking to Sudha, the knights approached Lamilia. They were going to capture her. Damn it. I couldn't move my body in this ice. Lamilia cursed inside her head as she couldn't even move her fingers in her current situation. Suddenly, a voice sounded in the whole area. Mila. Class rep. Lamilia heard those familiar voices and thought that she was hallucinating. The knights looked up and they saw a group of people in the air heading straight at them. Stop them. The knight shouted as he pointed at the group of people. But they were too late. The rooftop exploded as debris of rocks shot up in the air. Smoke and dust covered the whole area. Class rep, bear with it for a while. Lamilia heard a voice before a large amount of flames swallowed the rooftop including her. When the ice around her melted the flames immediately disappeared like nothing happened. Is this the only reason why you brought me here? No, we have to secure class rep first. Ah, that's too much trouble. You see the fat man before. That man is strong, I couldn't defeat him with my current strength. Lamilia heard the voice that felt like they were quarreling against each other. She couldn't see clearly because of the smoke, but she remembered those voices. Brian, Randolph, stop talking and do your job properly. We need to get Mila first. A loud voice, feminine voice, stopped the two. And Lumilia was familiar with this voice. This voice was coming from her friend, Neo. Guys dash. Lumilia was about to say something when a powerful gust of wind swept out the smoke and dust. Gregory looked at the newly arrived people and said, I don't care who you are, but I'll take care of you after I finish talking to the brat here. He was still talking to Sita through the talisman. Let's stop talking as we need to prevent this man. Randolph chuckled as he looked at Gregory, who was looking down at them. Chapter 136, Chain Quest, Ice Dome. I changed my mind. Gregory said in a cold tone while looking at Randolph. Then, he looked at Lumilia and added, I'm going to crush your hope. You think these people are enough to save you from me? You're wrong, I'll personally take care of you. Ho ho, someone's talking highly. Randolph laughed as he looked at Gregory. My knights. Gregory said in a loud voice. My lord. All the knights replied in unison. Capture all of them. Gregory commanded his knights. Yes, my lord. The knights replied when they heard the order of their lord. They bent their knees and jumped on the roofs of the houses around them. All of them pulled out their swords and looked at Lumilia and the rest. They were ready to attack them at any time. Why are you here, guys? Lumilia asked as she turned her head and saw Neo, Brian, Randolph, Lynn, George, and CL.U.S.Ter. We're here to take you back, class rep. You know we couldn't properly plan the cultural festival without you. Brian replied to her with a smile on his face. That's right, Mila. We're here to help you. Neo and Lynn said to Lumilia with concern in their voice. How did you dash? Lumilia didn't manage to finish her sentence as Brian interrupted her. CL.U.S.Ter told me that you will never come back. So I asked why and she showed me a letter from your father. Brian said with a proud expression. Oi! Why are you proud of that? Neo said as she looked at Brian on the corner of her eyes. I see. Lumilia nodded as she glanced at CL.U.S.Ter. It seems that CL.U.S.Ter picked up the letter that she threw in the trash can. Still, she's glad that they came here because they were worried about her. But why did you bring CL.U.S.Ter? She said she wanted to come, so I let her, Brian said as he shrugged his shoulder. Lynn and Neo didn't think that they would found their friend being cornered by the knights. They didn't know what happened, but they knew that they have to save Mila from the knights. They came here to talk to Lumilia. They didn't expect any fight at all. Only Brian expected that to happen. In the end, Brian was right, battles were everywhere in the city when they arrived here. All the students of the Mage Class 1B were here. When they arrived in the city, battles were already happening. They asked some people and found that Lumilia got kidnapped and the knights were trying to find her. But what they found here was the opposite. The knights were the real enemies and the rumors going around the city were all fakes. The students of the Mage Class 1B split up. The other students went to the other battlefields while Brian and the rest went here. Luckily they found Lumilia. You have the guts to talk in front of me, Gregory Vidrato? My knights attacked them. Gregory said in an arrogant tone while looking at them as if they were trash. Yes, my lord. The knights replied to Gregory before 5 knights stepped forward and charged towards Brian's group. Umph. Quit talking big. Randolph snorted and he waved his hand towards the 5 knights. White flash. A white light flashed brightly and it caused everyone in the vicinity to cover their eyes, including Gregory. It was so bright that they couldn't see what's happening around them. Randolph then appeared in front of the defenseless 5 knights. These knights were covering their eyes from the white light. He opened his palm and a bluish energy blade appeared. Mana blade. Randolph grabbed the blade and swung it towards the 5 knights, but something happened. A wall of rock rose up from the ground and blocked his blade. Tisk. As expected of that fat man. This skill isn't enough to stop him. Randolph clicked his tongue when he saw that his attack failed. Heis. Why did I come here? Randolph sighed and said to himself. He recalled that Brian asked him to come with him because they needed manpower. He came along because he was curious and he also has nothing to do. The wall cracked and it turned into tiny pieces of rocks. It then shot towards Randolph with high speed. Why didn't that Brian ask Sita? I thought they are friends. Randolph thought as he moved his body swiftly and avoided all the rocks that were thrown at him. Suddenly, spikes burst out of the ground. It went straight at Randolph. I thought that something interesting would happen here, but it just these dumb knights and noble. Well, it's true that this fat man is strong, but I wouldn't enjoy fighting him if he's this weak at his age. Randolph thought as he sliced all the spikes with his blade. He then jumped and saw 2 fireballs on his left and right side. Randolph simply shot 2 blades made of water to his left and right side. The water and fire collided and mist spread in the whole area. I can't be helped. I'll let them this time around. Randolph thought as two knights appeared from both of his sides and one in the front. He slowly opened his mouth and said, "Actually, I'm not a full-fledged mage. I'm an all-rounder." Randolph clenched his fist and shot a punch to the knight in front of him. 100 impact punch. His fist looked slow and it didn't even reach the knight. It hit the air but it caused ripples in the air and it distorted the space. A loud booming sound echoed in the whole area and it shook the ground heavily. The three knights that were about to attack Randolph flew towards Gregory along with the force of the punch. Their bones were all broken and it would need a high-level healing spell to completely heal them. Gregory was surprised when he saw this. But he quickly regained his composure and cast a defensive spell. Ground barrier. Armor reinforcement. A barrier made of rocks formed around Gregory and it protected him from Randolph's attack. It covered him like a cocoon to protect him in all directions. The earth shook heavily as the attack landed on the barrier. The barrier crashed on the roof and the floors below it until it landed on the ground. The inn started to crack and it slowly fell, burying the Gregory on the ground floor of the inn. Inside the barrier, Gregory had a deep frown on his face. The barrier was too hard as Randolph's attack only made a dent on it. Even that powerful skill couldn't shatter Gregory's barrier. That man is stronger than I expected. The skill that he used is a high-level combat arts called 100 impact punch. To think I would see this kind of arts from a mere nobody like him. Gregory thought as he gritted his teeth. What's wrong? Did you have some problems there? Don't worry, I will come there and your problem will increase. A voice sounded through his talisman. The talisman was still connected to the other so he still could hear Siddha's voice from the other side. Problem? There's no problem here. Gregory snorted and he cut the connection of the talisman so that he couldn't hear Siddha's annoying voice. Randolph observed it and he opened his mouth. He said, "Get ready, he's coming." Lynn and Neo took Lamilia while George and Brian were going to protect them from any knights that attacked them. Continue moving forward. We're going to stall them. George said. What stall? We're going to defeat them. Brian corrected George's words. Quit talking like that, you can't defeat him anyway, Randolph said with a smirk while looking at the two. A powerful magical energy burst out beneath the debris of rocks. The rocks were thrown away and shot off in a distance. Randolph waved his hand and a barrier around him that protected him from the rocks. He squinted his eyes and saw Gregory was releasing a very large amount of mana which was visible to N.A.K.E.D's. Oh, it looks like he's finally taking this seriously. Well, if it's me you can't fight me without getting serious, or else you would suffer the consequences. Randolph looked at Gregory with an amused expression. I don't want to fight this man. I only fight those geniuses. I'm an artificial genius, after all. He thought. Lin, Neo, CL.U.S.Ter, and Lamilia were moving forward but something appeared before them. A wall of ice rose up from the ground blocking their way. The wall continued to rise until it became a dome that covered the whole area. The place that it covered wasn't a small area but a large one that has 500 meters diameter. It covered the whole battlefield and it means that everyone wouldn't be able to leave this place as long as the barrier was still there. Randolph, Brian, and George looked up at the ice that was covering the sky. Gregory and the knights also looked up at the dome. This spell. Father. Lamilia muttered while looking at the barrier. Chapter 137, Chain Quest, Randolph vs. Gregory. A huge dome made of ice and it spans 500 meters diameter. Lamilia was familiar with this spell and the mana around it. Father. She muttered in a low voice and knew that they wouldn't be able to shatter this barrier that her father made. No one at their level has the power to break this high-level spell. Even if they worked together they would only be able to put a dent on it. Even if they used the highest fire element spell that they knew, it was all futile. Scorching hands. Brian muttered and flames covered both of his hands. He then jumped in the air and threw a powerful punch on the barrier. Blazing punch. His punch was powerful but Brian only managed to put a scratch on this enormous barrier. It's so hard. Brian said and he saw his fists were bleeding. Lin and Neo were shocked when they saw that Brian's punch couldn't do anything on the enormous barrier. The mana flowing in this barrier is immense and tremendous. Lin said as she placed her palm on the barrier. She was always sensitive to energy, so she felt the vast magical power that formed this barrier. It was 2 times the amount of mana she has. She measured her mana pool before and the result was that she has 352 mana in her mana pool. So 352 times 2 was equal to 704. That amount of mana was stored in this single spell. Actually, Ursus used less mana in casting this spell. It just because this spell was Ursus' inner spell that Lamilia felt that it was stronger than normal. How can we shatter this spell? Neo said. We can't, this is father's inner spell. An inner spell consumed less mana than a normal spell, so my father could cast this spell several times. Lamilia replied and she shook her head. This was also the reason why all of Suda's tier 1 spell only need an amount that's less 10 mana except for the Shadow Bind spell. Of course, the players were included in it. Haha, feel despair. You wouldn't be able to escape. Gregory laughed while looking at them as if he was mocking them. We'll leave this place. Don't worry class rep, all of Mage Class 1B are here to get you back. Brian said as he assured Lumilia. Yes, we're all leaving here. Lynn nodded at Brian's words. Sister Lumilia. CL.U.S.Ter looked at Lumilia with a worried expression. Randolph looked at them and said, Are you sure about that? From what I can see we have no chance to defeat this guy. Are you our comrades, right? So why are you saying that? Nao looked at Randolph and said. Well, I'm just stating the truth. It would be better if that Yujin guy joined us. Our chances would increase if he used that power. Randolph said as shrugged his shoulder. Yujin. Lumilia muttered and recalled her classmate that fought the top 3 ranker Yuriko in the special test. Yeah, that Yujin will be a great asset if he actively used his power. Randolph nodded at Lumilia, then he turned his head to Gregory. That guy? How strong he is. Brian became curious when he heard that Yujin have some sort of secret power. If he used his power then he could defeat you instantly with your current power, Randolph replied to him. Really? I wanted to fight him. I will surely fight him next time. Brian said with an excited expression. Suddenly, a red light flashed in front of them and it followed by intense heat. Soon, they saw a sea of flames heading towards them. So he couldn't hold it anymore, Randolph muttered as he patted his shirt. Let me handle this. He took a step forward and all of his mana burst out of his body. Randolph slowly opened his mouth and said, If we're talking about the inner spell then, I too have an inner spell. Randolph lifted his right hand and a large amount of mana gathered on his palm. Decaying Earth Wave. Transparent ripples appeared in Randolph's hand. It spread out and when it made contact with the flames disappeared. Even the ground started to have cracks and it eventually dried up. The buildings in front of Randolph fell down because all the things that made contact with the ripples will experience the strong corrosive power of the spell. That. A tier 3 spell. Gregory muttered when he saw the power of this spell. He was surprised when he found that this brat knew a tier 3 spell. Really? I didn't think that I would be forced to use tier 3 spell against these children. Gregory gritted his teeth and he cast his own tier 3 spell. Flame Cyclone. Flames appeared and it whirled around until it became a cyclone. Flames covered the entire sky and it shot towards the transparent ripples that Randolph cast. A huge explosion happened in the middle of the area that destroyed hundreds of houses inside the dome. The shock wave swept out and it ruins hundreds of houses until it hit the ice dome. Brian, George, Nao, Lynn, and Lumilia cast a defensive spell to protect themselves from the explosion. Class rep. Brian shouted as he stood in front of CL.U.S.Ter. I know. Lumilia gritted her teeth and cast several defensive spells. Arg. That guy is too reckless. He said to leave it to him but he caused this huge explosion. Nao endured the pain as the shock waves destroyed the barrier that she created. We can't blame him. Randolph is the only one who could fight that man. Lynn said with a helpless expression. It's really lucky that Randolph joined them in going to the city. She didn't expect this at all. All the students of Mage Class 1B were here except for Suda. She heard from Brian that Suda was working as an adventurer so he should be doing some quest right now. Smoke and dust covered the whole place and it leaves nothing. It blocked everyone's sight so they couldn't properly see what's in front of them. The place inside the dome was in ruins. All the houses were gone and the debris was scattered all over the place. Luckily, there's no civilian in this place. Ursus wouldn't cast the ice dome spell if there were some civilians left in this area. There's no safe place in kind of explosion. In fact, the ice dome helped contain the explosion, or else the shockwave would do more damage in the city. Cough. Cough. Lumilia coughed as she found herself lying on the ground. She covered her nose and looked around her. Ugh. She coughed a mouthful of blood. The red blood splattered on the ground. She then noticed that someone moved from the corner of her eyes. Who's that? She squinted her eyes as she couldn't clearly see because of the thick smoke but she saw a silhouette of a little girl. CL.U.S.Ter. Lumilia immediately pushed her body out of the ground. She went towards the silhouette and found that it was really CL.U.S.Ter. CL.U.S.Ter was unconscious but her body was twitching non-stop. Lumilia didn't know what to do so she cast some healing spell but it didn't work at all. Let me. A voice of a man sounded behind her. Lumilia didn't even need to turn her head to know who's this person. Randolph walked towards with injuries all over his body. You're injured. Lumilia said while looking at his figure. Don't worry about this. This is nothing to me. Randolph said and he placed his palm on CL.U.S.Ter's forehead. Calm heart. Slowly, CL.U.S.Ter's body stopped twitching. Lamilia sighed in relief when she saw this. She recalled that the one who saved all of them was CL.U.S.Ter. When all of the barriers that they cast shattered and they were thrown on the ground along with the houses, CL.U.S.Ter showed strange movements. Damn. It's too strong. Brian shouted and he was swept out. His body flew away and crashed on the dome. I'm sorry, Mila. Lynn gritted her teeth and her barrier broke before she was smashed on the dome. It was followed by Lamilia, George, and Neo. All of them couldn't do anything against this. They were the nearest to the collision, so they really felt the powerful impact of the two Tier 3 spells. At that time, CL.U.S.Ter was left standing alone. The shockwaves, flames, and the powerful winds couldn't reach her body at all. CL.U.S.Ter's eyes were lifeless. She opened her mouth and said in a monotonic voice, calculating. The magic and power. After a few seconds, she waved her hands and said, protect. A bluish barrier formed around them and it protected them from any harm. Lamilia has a lot of questions in her mind, but since CL.U.S.Ter was unconscious she could only swallow it. Thank you. Lamilia muttered in a low voice. She then lifted up her head and looked at Randolph. Is everyone okay? For the meantime, Randolph replied with a smile on his face. Chapter 138, Chain Quest, please help me. Everyone is safe for now. Randolph paused for a moment, then he added, you're all quite lucky that you survived from the impact despite how close you are from the collision of the two Tier 3 spells. Yeah. Lamilia knew that it wasn't luck. That powerful impact would kill them, if not they would receive heavy injuries that could be healed by a Tier 3 healing spell. If not for CL.U.S.Ter they wouldn't survive with little injuries. So this was the reason why Sita was interested in CL.U.S.Ter's origin. She has a mysterious power that was hard to explain. I'll tell you that I couldn't cast another spell. I used all of my mana. Randolph said to Lamilia while looking around. That Tier 3 spell consumed most of his mana. Although that spell was his inner spell, he still consumed most of his mana in his mana pool. His mana pool wasn't as vast as those veterans. He was just a first-year student and have a lot of room for development. Really, this feeling is irritating, Randolph commented as he felt a little dizzy. This was the side effect of draining all of his mana in his mana pool. With this, he would be at a disadvantage if he fought the fat man. Well, he was at a disadvantage from the very beginning. That fat man was clearly a higher level than them. The wind blew strongly and the thick smoke that was blocking everyone's vision slowly disappeared. They finally get to see what happened around them and how badly the impact damages the whole area in the ice dome. Lamilia looked around and she saw Brian, Lynn, Neo, and George lying on the ground. It hurt so much. Brian said in a loud voice as he grabbed his broken right arm. His arm broke when he crashed on the dome before. It's hard to move, George said as he used every fiber of his muscles to sat on the ground. I'm sorry George, you're injured because of us. Neo apologized to George. She sat on the ground and looked at George, who has injuries all over his body. It's okay. George shook his head. He protected Lynn and Neo when the flames swallowed everything. Everyone, do you really think that we would be able to escape from this barrier? Randolph looked at them and asked. I'm sorry everyone, it's all my fault. Lamilia apologized to everyone and she lowered her head in front of them. I'm an all-rounder and I could protect myself even without using mana, but I don't think I could handle it if I have to protect all of them. Randolph thought and he glanced at Brian. Really, I didn't expect that we're fighting a veteran. You shouldn't do that. As the one who bears the name Asvers shouldn't easily bow her head in front of everyone. Suddenly, a voice sounded and it gathered everyone's attention. Lamilia and the rest turned their heads and saw Gregory was looking down on them. Gregory shifted his eyes on Randolph and said, You're one dangerous fella. Because of you, I've lost my knights. In the collision of the two Tier 3 spells, Gregory didn't protect his knights, so most of his knights died in the impact of the powerful spells. Those who survived were in critical condition that they would die if someone didn't help them. The knights of the Vidrato family didn't have CL.U.S.Ter to protect them, so their fate was sealed when the two powerful spells clashed. They were also close to the collision, so there's no doubt about it that most of them died. Randolph looked at Gregory with a frown on his face. He was observing Gregory's facial expression. Do you really think I couldn't counter a Tier 3 spell? I'm not the head of the Vidrato family for nothing. Gregory mocked Randolph. He then smiled and added, but well, you're pretty impressive for someone at your age. Unfortunately, you fought against me. Of course, I'm outstanding and you don't have to tell me that, Randolph smirked as he shrugged his shoulder. He then planed his hand on his left ear. Can you kill this man? He said in his mind. Yes, master, but you don't have to worry about it, your classmates are heading in that direction. A small voice replied to Randolph's question. Hmm. My classmates? I don't think they have the power to stop this man. Randolph said in his mind with a confused expression. You and Druin, the one who held the lost power, and Suda Ishii who currently have best Faram in his body. The voice answered Randolph. Oh? That Suda Ishii is here. Randolph was surprised when he heard Suda's name. Yes. Then, you don't need to move. With the combination of those two, they could handle this man. Randolph couldn't help but grin when he thought the combined power of Suda and Eugen. Oi! Did I say anything funny? Gregory frowned when he saw Randolph smirked. Nothing. Randolph shook his head. How did that Suda have the best Faram? He asked in his mind. The voice explained how Suda get the power of the monster and Randolph understood it. You all are pissing me off. Gregory said in a loud voice and his magical power exploded. His magical power pressured everyone in the vicinity. The atmosphere felt suffocating for the people who don't have much strength left in their bodies. I'm going to take you and you will marry my son, Gregory said while looking at Lumilia. He took a step forward and slowly approached Lumilia. According to his plan, his family would be tied together to the Asver's family and he would get a piece of that crystal flame honey. Then, he would help the Asver's family fend of the other family and the nobles from the Melosa country. Maybe, he will receive another crystal flame honey from Ursus if he did great. Why can't you understand that it's all for your family and your own good? I will help you fend off those nobles from Melosa country. It's all for your own good. Gregory said while looking at Lumilia. You're saying that it's for her own good. If you really want to help her then you can do that without having her marry your son. I bet you just want something from her. Brian said as he tried his best to stand up and looked at Gregory. Yeah, Brian is right, why can't Mila decide things on her own? It's her life so you don't have the right to force her. Lynn said as she looked at Gregory. Let's just face the reality that all of you couldn't do anything to me. Gregory frowned and he waved his hand. Brian and Lynn were pushed back heavily and both of them once again crashed on the dome. We're taking Mila back. Neo rushed towards Gregory. It's futile. Gregory simply waved his hand and Neo crashed on the dome just like Lynn and Brian. He then looked at Randolph and asked, are you going to attack me like them? Nope. Randolph shook his head and smirked. He waiting to watch the show that's going to unfold. He knew who's going to arrive, so he was quite excited to see this. Really, I'm really glad that I come here. He thought as his grin widened. The amusing things will happen in just a minute. I wonder what face will you make when you experience defeat from someone several years younger than you. He thought while looking at Gregory. Gregory started to advance towards Lumilia. Every step that he made rung inside Lumilia's head. Lumilia tightened her grip on the unconscious CL.U.S.Ter. She then recalled what Suda said before. You don't have power but you have me. If you have any problems just ask me and I will do everything. His voice sounded in her mind. I am not going to marry your son. Lumilia stuttered at first but her voice became louder at the end. Huh? What are you saying? Gregory stopped on his track and looked at Lumilia. I don't want to marry your son. I don't want to be bound by my family. Lumilia stopped for a moment and she added, I'm going to make a decision for myself for the very first time. I'm going back to Ladro City. I'm going to join the cultural festival with everyone. I want to continue studying and get stronger. So. She took a deep breath and shouted, please help me. Sutae. You're still Gregory was saying something when he heard a familiar voice. Good job. A voice of a man sounded. Gregory looked up as he heard the voice came from above. At last, they are here. Randolph grinned widely. Several figures crashed on the ground creating small craters and causing the dust and smoke to form around. Lumilia lifted her hand to cover her eyes. She used her free hand to embrace CL.U.S.Ter in her chest. The wind blew strongly and the smoke started to disappear. Suda. Lumilia looked up and saw Suda. In front of her were her classmates. Not only Suda, but everyone from the Mage Class 1B was here. Chapter 139, Chain Quest, Suda vs Gregory 1. All Ursus did was casting the Tier 3 spell Ice Dome. After that, he didn't provide any assistance to Gregory in capturing his daughter. It's because someone appeared before him. He was standing on the rooftop of a tall building while looking at the dome of ice that he created and opposite of him was a man. The legendary man and the one who was entitled hero was standing in front of him. You know that it's my family's affair. So why are you here of all people? Ursus asked the man in front of him. The man in front of Ursus was a tall man with an average build. He has short messy blonde hair and yellow eyes. He was wearing a navy blue coat on top of a white shirt and wearing pants with the same color of his shirt. He was the one who was called the Flame Master, Bargain Heavyfield. One of the most powerful people in the Ladro Institute and a man who was acknowledged as the hero of the Melosa War. I'm not here to fight. I'm just here to protect my students in case something happened to them. Bargain said as he sat down and looked at the dome. Yeah, you've made quite a scene, casting a tier 3 spell in the middle of the city. Did you talk to the city lord about this? You wouldn't cast this spell in the middle of the city without the city lord's permission at all. By students, do you mean the top students? Ursus asked while looking at Bargain. I wonder about that. Bargain replied to him leisurely. My daughter is not a top student, so I know that. Her power isn't that great, so the Institute would send a person like you just to protect her. The Institute also wouldn't gain anything from her. Ursus said to Bargain. It didn't really matter if Bargain was showing that relaxed attitude in front of him. He knew that even if there were dozen of him, he still wouldn't be able to defeat Bargain. He guessed that he needed 30 of his power level before he could fight Bargain, and that's only fighting him on equal ground, not defeating Bargain. To defeat him, he needed 50 of his power level, but only 2 would survive at that battle. That's how powerful the Flame Master. Whoa, you're saying bad things to your daughter. Bargain looked at Ursus with a smile on his face. He then added, the Institute is not protecting her for you. The Institute decided to protect her because it wanted to get a good impression on the students with the potential to reach the top. By that, you mean that Suda? Ursus understood what Bargain mean. Yes, since Suda is serious about taking Lumilia back to the Institute. The Institute responded by helping him so that he would get a good impression of the Institute. You could say that we're investing. Bargain explained to him. Also, Suda is not the only student that have potential here. Actually, 4 of them are present here that have the potential to surpass me, including Suda. I see. So that's the reason why. Those 4 students appeared here to get my daughter back to the Institute. That's why the Institute sent you here. Ursus understood all of it. You're correct. I'm here to protect them. By protect, I mean it as protecting them from dying, not babysitting them. Bargain paused for a moment before he continued, I will only prevent them from dying. Even if they lost their battles, it's okay. They needed it to grow stronger. Suddenly, both of them stopped as they felt something inside the dome. Bargain squinted his eyes and his senses passed through the ice dome. He muttered, Tier 3 spell. Not just him, Ursus felt it too. The power of the Tier 3 spells inside the dome. Both of them felt the collision of the 2 Tier 3 spells. Bargain lifted up his hand and he gathered his magical power on it. He then made a grabbing motion, but he stopped midway. Interesting, Bargain smirked when he felt what happened inside the dome. He knew that something protected the students in his place. Really, the students of Ladro Institute are incomparable. To think that he even knew a Tier 3 spell. Ursus said. That's not really the case, they are special and I'm sure you will understand it someday, Bargain replied to him. Suda. Lumilia looked up and saw Suda in front of her. Her other classmates were here, but she focused her attention on Suda. Good job. You followed my advice, so you don't need to worry about it. Leave everything to me and I will handle this. Suda turned his head at Lumilia and said. He then looked at Yujin, Alice, and his other classmates including the Gale group, and said, I'll handle this. Go help Lumilia and the others. Are you sure? Alice looked at him and asked. Yeah, I'm sure. I will defeat this guy. Suda nodded and he looked at Gregory. I understand. Alice nodded at him, then she walked towards Lumilia. Yujin also nodded at him and didn't say anything. Their other classmates went to help Brian, Lin, Neo, and George. The Brianna, Tim, and Jane too helped the injured ones. Before coming here, Suda helped them first, but they saw the huge explosion, so Suda used the Beast Faram in protecting all of them. Suda. Lin muttered when she saw Suda's back in front of Lumilia. She then looked at Lumilia, who was looking at Suda's back. She recalled what Lumilia said when before Suda and the rest appeared here. I see. She said in a low voice and looked at her hands. I wonder if Suda will save me if something happened to me. She thought. Oh. So he wanted to fight him alone. Randolph was amused at Suda's decision. He didn't think that Suda would win at Gregory even with the power of Best Faram. Best Faram wasn't enough to defeat Gregory, but if that Yujin joined the battle and used the lost power, then there's no doubt that they would win. But if Suda has something in his sleeve that could replace Yujin, then he would be fine in fighting Gregory alone. I can't wait to see what you will show. Randolph thought with a smirk on his face. He could see the Best Faram flowing out of Suda's body non-stop. Of course, it would flow out as Suda didn't have the monster orb to contain the Best Faram. It will continue to flow out until he runs out of energy and drained himself. Suda looked at the system while taking out 2 bottles of mana potion. He drank it and felt a burning sensation inside his body as the mana was turning into Best Faram. Lumilia's special quest triggered. Boss, fight and defeat Gregory, who is preventing Lumilia from leaving the city. Rewards, 50,000 EXP, 15 free attribute points, and 10 skill points. He triggered this special quest when Lumilia asked him to help her. In this special quest, Suda just needed to defeat Gregory. The rewards were amazing. To think that he would receive so much quest from Lumilia. Ever since the incident at Desolate Woods, he was always triggering quest from her. "You're really my lucky star, class rep." Suda grinned and said. "Yeah." Lumilia was surprised when she heard Suda's words. Alice too was surprised when she heard Suda's words. She took a glance at his back. "I can't believe this. You choose them instead of my L.U.S.True's family," Gregory said with a hint of anger in his voice. He looked at Lumilia and didn't understand why she chose these people over his family. Suda stepped forward and closed his eyes. After a few seconds, he opened his eyes, and a smile formed on his face. "Sure, that's not a bad deal," he said in a low voice, and he focused his attention on Gregory. Since Suda was going to fight, everyone brought the injured people away because they don't want to get caught in the aftershock of the battles. "Rejoice, Gregory." Suda pulled out the Vajra sword Saya and stabbed it on the ground. He looked at his system and saw that he had 85 free attribute points. He added 50 of this to increase his intelligence attribute. Increasing his intelligence attribute means that his mana would increase. He then allocated the remaining 35 to his vitality, so that his body would be able to handle the best Faram. With his current condition, he would collapse after a few minutes. "Now, I can finally take you on," Suda said to Gregory with a serious expression. His aura increased drastically to the point that it matches Gregory's aura. The Vajra sword emitted a dark red color aura and it coated the entire sword. The dark red aura spread out and Suda absorbed it in his body. "Saya, let me borrow your power." Chapter 140, Chain Quest, Suda vs Gregory 2. The Vajra sword Saya emitted a dark red energy. The energy spread on the ground beneath Suda's feet. Suda's aura skyrocketed and it reached the level of Gregory. He was using the Vajra sword Saya's ultimate skill. The possession that he hadn't tried before. This was the first time he was using this skill ever since he acquired the Vajra sword. Suda's pupils turned into red color and his body slowly absorbed the energy that the sword was emitting. What's this? Gregory subconsciously took a step backward when he felt Suda's energy reach his level. "Have you forgotten who am I?" Suda said, and he slowly lifted up his hand. The sword trembled and it slowly changed form. The simple one-edge blade became a blade that has an exquisite design. The handle didn't change as it still looks the one that came from katana, but it only has a black orb on the pommel of the handle. There's a white long cloth that was attached to the black orb. Then, a huge upper body of a woman materialized behind Suda. The body was red in color and it has one pair of horns sticking out on the side of her head. The woman didn't have eyes, but she has a nose and mouth. Her mouth seemed to be laughing at everyone and her whole body was semi-transparent. It was the corporeal body of the red woman inside the Vajra sword. Everyone took a step backward when they saw this scene. This scene of the red woman behind Suda was giving them some creepy feelings. They couldn't help but felt goosebumps from seeing this. Alice and Lynn looked at this in daze. They were the closest to Suda, so they felt the rise of his aura and this strange phenomenon that was happening right now. Alice then regained her composure and she quickly took Lynn away. She knew that this place was going to become the battlefield for Suda and Gregory. "Let's get out of here," Alice said as she carried Lynn in her arms. "What's that?" Lynn asked while looking at Suda. "I don't know." Alice shook her head. After the next moment, the red woman shrunk down to normal body size. She opened her arms and hugged Suda from behind. Then, her figure fused with Suda's body. "I thought class rep said it to you." Suda grabbed the handle of the sword and slowly pulled it out. He lifted up his other hand and bit his thumb. Then, he placed his thumb on the red blade of the sword and rubbed his blood on the blade by drawing a line on it. "Yufufu, contract complete." A playful voice sounded in Suda's mind. "Xing. I'm going to show you what it means to take me, Suda Ishii, with his dark grade weapon." Suda then raised the sword above his head and the sword exerted a powerful force. It caused a dark red ripple in the air and the ice dome collapsed. It broke like a fragile glass from the top and every tiny piece of it sprinkled down. The ice dome reached its limit after it contained the power of the two tier 3 spells. It collapsed as soon as some powerful energy made contact with it. Impossible. A mere student, wielding a national level weapon. Gregory was alarmed. He was now losing his composure as he felt that Suda's power really reached his level. No, Suda was even stronger than him right now. I've never heard such a thing. He tried to deny what Suda said just now. He was in a state where he would lose his sanity at any moment. Of course, up until now, I didn't meet a worthy opponent to use the full power of this sword, Suda said, and he pointed his sword at Gregory. The Vajra sword, Saya. Suda paused for a moment before he continued, the sacred sword of the ancient Vajra race that annihilated countless demons in the war 20,000 years ago. Yufufu, you're lying. Do you want me to tell you about my origin? Saya laughed in his mind. You. Why must you get in my way? Gregory shouted as he charged towards Sita. I don't know, it's just that you're in the way of my quest, Sita said, and he charged towards Gregory. In an instant, he appeared in front of Gregory. He then swung his sword, but Gregory saw this and managed to avoid getting slashed. Gregory then took a distance away from Sita before picking up any random sword on the ground. He coated his sword using his mana to strengthen it so that he could exchange blows with Sita. Sita chased Gregory and he didn't let him escape this place. He thrust his sword forward. Gregory reacted quickly and blocked his thrust using his sword. His sword cracked from that collision. There's no way that an ordinary blue-grade sword would last long against the dark-grade sword that released its power. At best, a normal blue-grade sword wouldn't last longer than 5 strikes. Since Gregory was strengthening it using his mana, it would last longer than 5 strikes. Sita continued to slash his sword at Gregory, while Gregory could only passively defend himself from Sita. Sita didn't even give him a chance to attack, as he would shatter Gregory's sword. Once Sita shattered Gregory's sword, Gregory would back down and picked another sword. Gregory jumped back and lifted up his hand above his head. He opened his palm and cast a powerful Tier 3 spell. Downfall Flaming Rocks. A huge magic circle appeared in the sky. It emitted a dense magical aura, and after a few seconds, hundreds of flaming rocks emerged from the magic circle. The rocks fell down with powerful momentum. Sita ignored those flaming rocks on the sky as he charged towards Gregory. He then used Crimson Moon skill. A dark red light flew out of his sword and it went directly towards Gregory. Gregory knew that he couldn't avoid it in time, so he chose to block the skill with his sword. Arg. Gregory couldn't completely block the skill using a blue-grade weapon. His sword broke and the red light flashed on his right arm. He then felt something wrong with that skill. The red energy was seeping inside his body. What the hell? He realized that this energy was corrupting his mana pool. He quickly circulated his mana and expelled the red energy out of his body. With the level of his control over his mana, he could expel the red energy, unlike Mudun, who didn't notice it until the last minute. But he still lost a little bit of control over his mana even though he managed to expel the red energy out of his body. Damn, that brat. Gregory cursed angrily. He looked at Sita with intense rage. The flaming rocks were just above the two. Sita cast Shadow Bind and hundreds of towering tentacles like shadows rose up from the ground. Although the Shadow Bind spell was powerful, it's still a Tier 1 spell, so it wasn't a match of a Tier 3 spell of Gregory. If you want to make Crimson Moon and Cross Moon stronger, just use Best Faram and my energy along with it. Don't just randomly use the skill as you fit. There's a proper way to use every skill in the world. A feminine voice sounded in Sita's mind. Sita nodded his head and he looked up above him. The tentacles like shadows were getting destroyed by the falling flaming rocks above him. He gripped his sword tightly and dashed towards Gregory. You still want to fight? Gregory gritted his teeth when he saw Sita rushed at him. If I only brought my armor and powerful knights here, you people wouldn't have a chance to win. Sita swung his sword, which was coated with dark red aura. Gregory jumped away quickly and managed to avoid getting slashed by Sita, but Sita chased after him without hesitation. Sita charged toward Gregory and thrust his sword forward. He used stab skill along with it. Gregory once again jumped backward to avoid Sita's sword, but he was wrong to do that. The stab combat arts was already at level 4, so it has a range of 5 meters. Also, the piercing effect of this skill was quite high. Added with Sita's boosted strength, it pierced Gregory's shoulder. Blood spurted out of his wounds. Gregory could avoid getting hit if he moved his body sideways. Arg. Gregory groaned in pain as he looked at Sita with rage in his eyes. Sita took a deep breath and he continued to clash against Gregory. His body couldn't handle the Best Faram and the Vajra sword Saya's power at the same time. Plus, he found that the percentage added of the possession could be increased. A normal possession skill could increase his overall abilities by 50%. He knew that the 50% increase of his abilities wasn't enough to defeat Gregory, so Saya offered him a deal to greatly increase his powers more than the added 50%. Chapter 141, Chain Quest, Sita vs Gregory 3. We better get going, Brianna said while looking at the chaotic scene. Powerful shockwaves were sweeping out the area every second. Gregory and Sita's battle was many times higher than their level. They were taking damage just by standing near the battlefield of the two. That's right. Jane nodded and looked at everyone from Mage Class 1B. She opened her mouth and said, let's get out of the city. All of you are Miss Lumilia's classmates, right? In that case, help the injured ones and leave this place immediately. By injured people, Jane was talking about Brian, Lynn, Neo, CL.U.S.Ter, George, and Lumilia. Everyone looked at her and nodded their head in agreement. Gregory was using a powerful Tier 3 spell while Sita was using Best Faram and Dark Grade Sword, so their battle was fierce. It's only a matter of time before they get caught up in Sita's battle. Since all the students of Mage Class 1B were here, They could easily carry 6 injured people with their numbers. Sita. Lumilia muttered as he looked at Sita's figure, who was fighting Gregory alone. She was in the back of Alice. She couldn't move her body well, so Alice has to carry Lumilia in her back. You don't need to worry about Sita. He will not fight an individual like that man if he knew that he didn't have a chance to win. Alice said when she heard Lumilia's voice. Also, Sita is only fighting him so that you could leave the city, am I right? If that's the case, then we better leave as soon as possible. You're right. Lumilia nodded at Alice's words as she knew that Alice was right. Brianna and Jane lead the way while the students followed them from behind. John stayed in the rear so that he could protect them if someone attacked them. John looked at Randolph and Eugen, who stayed. He opened his mouth and asked, "You two, are you planning to stay here?" "Nope, I just wanted to watch the show in front of me," Randolph said with a smirk on his face. He then turned to John and added, "You can go now. I don't need you to protect me. I can protect myself." "Okay." John nodded, then he looked at Eugen. When he saw that Eugen wasn't saying anything, John turned around and followed the group. Randolph looked at John before he turned his gaze at Eugen. "So what are you planning to do here? Do you also want to watch the fight like me or not?" Eugen ignored Randolph and he instead focused his attention at Sita, who was fighting Gregory. "Ignoring me, huh? I also didn't expect that Sita's sword is a dark grade weapon. If he didn't have that sword to stop that noble head, then are you going to use your power?" Randolph said as he looked at the battle. "Every second the ground will tremble and a powerful gust of wind will follow after that. Sometimes the wind possessed heat that could melt down ordinary folks." Eugen turned his head when he heard Randolph mention his power. He knitted his brows and stared at Randolph's face. "If you're not going to use it, then you will not be able to fight me or Sita. Even Brian could defeat you with your current normal power." Randolph slightly turned his head and looked at Eugen from the corner of his eyes. "Am I right, spirit user?" "As expected, you know it." Eugen finally opened his mouth. "But how did you know it?" "How? It's simple, I can see the spirit particles around you," Randolph said as he pointed at his own eyes. "You should use it because you will not be able to master that power without using it. That's why you couldn't completely hide the spirit particles from my eyes. Even the teachers didn't know about it?" "Don't tell me you have," Eugen said as he realized something from Randolph's words. "Yes, I have special eyes." Randolph nodded with a grin on his face. If Sita was here, Sita would be shocked if he heard this information. Spirit User or Spirit Contractor was one of the super rare classes in the Battle World Online. A Spirit Contractor uses the spirit that they contracted as a source of power. Most of their strength came from the spirit. The contractor will grow stronger along with the spirit and will learn a unique skill suitable for their class. Sita knew some powerful players that have the Spirit Contractor class. They were in the top 100 global rankings of the game. The ground shook heavily as a huge explosion occurred. Exploding Earth. Gregory cast another powerful spell and the ground beneath Sita exploded. Sita jumped in the air and he controlled his best Faram to block the explosion. He then tightly gripped the Vajra sword and charged his energy on the sword. The sword emitted a bright red light and Sita thrust it towards the explosion beneath him. He only created a barrier using best Faram to stall Gregory's spell. He knew that it wasn't enough to stop a tier 3 spell, so he had to create an attack that could match the spell. Sita poured a huge amount of best Faram and the Vajra sword Saya energy in the sword before he used the Crimson Moon skill. A huge red crescent energy clashed against the tier 3 spell that Gregory cast and it caused another huge explosion. Everyone in the city right now could feel the burst of power and the trembling of the ground. The aftershocks of the battles woke up every citizen of the Gripen city. "This is bad. He's too strong," Gregory said between his ragged breath. His body was full of wounds as he couldn't completely avoid Sita's attack. Although, he knew how to fight using a sword. Gregory would say that he wasn't an expert to it as his expertise was casting powerful spells. But to think that a mere student was suppressing him with sword skill was out of his expectations. He still practiced the way of the sword longer than Sita, so how? It's because of that dark grade sword. Even he, the head of the Vidrato family, didn't possess a dark grade weapon at all. He couldn't handle Sita's aggressive fighting style. Gregory felt Sita appeared behind him. Sita couldn't completely hide his presence because of the powerful energy leaking out in his body. Sita didn't have a monster orb, so he couldn't contain the best Faram in his body. That's the reason why Gregory could sense his position easily. Gregory bent his body forward and a red blade passed above him. He controlled his mana and coated his body. He quickly turned around and launched a powerful kick at Sita. Sita anticipated his attack, so he managed to avoid it easily without any problem. "I got you." He opened his left hand and quickly grabbed Gregory's leg. "Damn." Gregory cursed as Sita pulled him while thrusting the Vajra sword at the same time. Gregory looked at the sword and he swiftly moved his hand. He changed the direction of the sword, which was heading towards his chest, by hitting it on the side. The sword pierced his left shoulder and he avoided fatal injury. He then clenched his fist and shot a powerful punch at Suda. Suda received the blow on his face. He felt a taste of iron inside his mouth. His grip on Gregory's leg loosened, so Gregory forcefully pulled his leg and used the momentum to launch a kick using his other feet. Suda flew and crashed on the ground, creating a crater filled with smoke and dust. Arg. That hurts. Suda cursed under his breath. He looked at his exhausted body and found that his blood was oozing out in some of his pores. Really, his body couldn't take the pressure of the best Faram and the Vajra sword. The deal that he made with his sword was to increase the added percentage to his abilities by 100%. A normal possession skill of the Vajra sword could increase his overall abilities by 50%, and this 50% wasn't enough to defeat Gregory, so Suda made a deal with his sword. And that was to increase the added percentage by 100% in exchange for his lifespan. A normal goblin has 20 years lifespan. So, Suda has 20 years lifespan, but it grew larger when he evolved into high-end goblin and goblin corruptor. Both of his evolution increased his lifespan by 10 years. It means that evolving into high-end goblin increased Suda's lifespan by 5 years and the goblin corruptor too. Saya, the Vajra sword, took these 10 years in exchange for power, and Suda agreed to her condition. He doesn't need to worry about it because once he evolved into a higher life form, his lifespan will increase great. It was especially the case in his next evolution because, in this evolution, Suda will gain his own monster orb. Saya. Suda muttered as he looked up. Chapter 142, Chain Quest, Suda vs Gregory 4. Huff. Huff. Gregory was gasping as blood flowed down from his mouth. He looked down at the sword that pierced his shoulder. This is a dark grade sword. A weapon of national level. He muttered while looking at the sword. Slowly lifting up his hand, he grabbed the blade of the sword. He was about to pull out the sword when he felt something invading his mind. Arg. Damn. This sword. Gregory cursed and endured it before he finally pulled out the sword on his shoulder. A dark grade weapon is really different from other weapons. He knew that he wouldn't be able to use this sword. The energy of the sword was damaging his mana pool. If he wasn't fighting Suda, he would try to control the sword, but now, he doesn't want to do it because he would only exhaust himself. Also, since the owner was Suda, Suda could control this energy at will, so if he continued to hold this sword, Suda could manipulate the energy to utterly destroy him. And that's what he was avoiding to happen. Suda pushed himself out of the ground. He waved his hand and his energy dispersed the smoke around him. He looked at the system and saw that he only has 10 minutes to finish the quest. He knew that Lumilia already left with his other classmates, so he doesn't need to worry about her. He only needed to defeat Gregory and follow her. But there's one thing that in his mind. And that's Lumilia's father, Ursus Vanus Veres. After casting a tier 3 spell Ice Dome, Ursus didn't show his presence nor move to stop Suda and Lumilia. I need to wrap this up quickly, Suda muttered in a low voice, and he wiped the blood on his mouth. He looked around and saw Gregory was standing 30 meters away from him. And the Vajra sword Saya was embedded on the ground beside Gregory. The Vajra sword. Suda muttered as he squinted his eyes and looked at Gregory. He knew the reason why Gregory wasn't using the Vajra sword. It was because whoever held it would feel the sword controlling their body. It was also the reason why Suda didn't care if someone took his sword. You can control the sword by using the energy that I provided in your body. A feminine voice sounded in his mind. Control. Suda was surprised when he heard her words. It's the first time he heard that the sword has this function. The Vajra sword Saya was stronger than it was in the game and also more dangerous. Because the will inside the sword was sentient and could do other things than what it was in the game. Okay. Suda nodded his head and he opened his palm. He controlled his energy inside his body. He felt the presence of the Vajra sword. Even if he closed his eyes, he could sense the location of the sword with the energy that was connected to him. This is really helpful. Suda couldn't help but smile. He opened his palm and the Vajra sword flew towards his hand. Suda grabbed the sword and without hesitation, he dashed towards Gregory. Gregory braced himself and he cast another spell. Blazing Earth Wall. A 10-meter tall flaming wall rose up from the ground in front of Suda. Its width was 30 meters. Suda bent knees and jumped over the wall, but the wall showed some movements. The 10-meter tall flaming walls grew taller and it became a 30-meter tall flaming wall. What? Suda was surprised. He was going to crash in the flaming wall, so he swung his sword in the wall. He used the equipment skill Crimson Moon repeatedly and the flaming wall showed cracks on it. For the finishing touch, Suda pulled back his hand and thrust his sword forward. He used stab skill and his sword pierced through the flaming wall. The piercing effect of this skill was high, so once the flaming wall showed cracks on it he could easily shatter it with stab skill. Suda passed over the walls and he found that Gregory was already gone. Sita frowned and he quickly turned around while casting Shadow Bind and Shadow Ball at the same time. Towering tentacles like shadows rose from the ground. The shadows were like Sita's body at all, so he could sense when it made contact with an unknown object. He would be able to immediately know Gregory's position if one of the shadows touched Gregory. Gone. Sita squinted his eyes and he looked in the sky above him. He tried to find if Gregory was in the air, but Gregory also wasn't in the air. He then felt a slight tremble on the ground beneath his feet. Sita opened his eyes widely and he immediately switched position with the ball of shadow that he threw before. Just 1 second after he vanished, the ground exploded and a pillar of flame stood on it. That was close. Sita muttered in a low voice while looking at the pillar of flame. That was a high-level combat arts called ground-bursting strike. He would suffer heavy injury in his body if that skill hit him. After a few moments, the pillar of flames dissipated and Sita saw Gregory. He knew that Gregory was also tired like him and both of them wouldn't be able to last any longer. Sita glanced at his system and saw that he only have 7 minutes left to complete the quest. I'll defeat you, Gregory muttered while looking at Sita with a serious expression. He wasn't fighting to capture Lumilia anymore, he was fighting to defeat Sita. He doesn't want to suffer a loss from a mere student. He would lose his face that way and he wanted to avoid that. In the distance, Randolph and Eugen were watching the battle. This will decide the battle. Even if that fat man won the battle, he still wouldn't be able to stop Lumilia from leaving the city. Randolph commented while watching the battle. He could say that there's no point in continuing this battle. Even if Sita lost or won, Lumilia would still be able to leave the city. It's already decided that it's Sita's overall victory. Eugen glanced at Randolph when he heard Randolph's words. He nodded and said, yeah, he did have any knights with him, so who's going to stop class rep? Even if there are some knights, they wouldn't be able to prevent class rep from leaving the city. After all, the students of the Mage Class 1B were with Lumilia and the C-rank adventurers. Randolph looked at Eugen and asked, are you not going to leave? I guess that the city guards would be coming here soon. The reason why he knew that the city guards were going to come here was because of his mysterious guard. That guard of his reported that the city guards of his were preparing themselves to come here anytime. Randolph also heard from his guard that the city guard didn't dare to come here. He guessed that the city lord has some deal with the nobles, that's why the city lord didn't interfere with this chaos. That deal was only not to interfere with the nobles' work. The city lord wouldn't do anything within a time. Of course, by doing nothing it also means that the city lord wouldn't help the noble capture Lumilia. The city lord was only watching the scene like a passerby. What about you? Eugen asked back as he looked at Randolph in the eyes. I will watch this fight until the end. It's interesting that way. Randolph laughed. We're going to move after 5 minutes. Tell the guards to prepare themselves. The city lord said as he placed both of his hands on the back. He was looking at the battle from the city lord mansion at the center of the city. He could clearly see the battle in his position, so he knew that the battle was going to end soon. Yes, my lord. The assistant bowed his head before he left. The city lord glanced at his assistant before he looked at the battle. He opened his mouth and muttered, I didn't expect that a student has full control over a dark grade weapon. This piece of news soon would shake the whole kingdom and everyone will know that students have a dark grade weapon. I'm going to finish this, Gregory said, and he took a deep breath. He then raised both of his hands and opened his palms. His magic power spiked up and he gathered it on his palm. A huge orange magic circle formed on his palms. Red striking shot. A red beam shot out from the magic circle and it flew straight to Sita. The force behind this attack was devastating, and if Sita took it head on, Sita would be half dead. Sita looked at this tier 3 spell with a serious expression on his face. He lifted up his hand and pointed his finger at it. A red ball of energy formed on the tip of Sita's finger. The red ball spun like a razor and it expanded before it shrunk. Bistru. After charging, it shot a powerful beam towards Gregory. Chapter 143, Chain Quest, Sita vs Gregory 5. Sita pointed his finger at Gregory and a large collection of red energy began to gather at the tip of his finger. It continued to grow, collecting more and more energy from Sita's body each passing second. The colossal amount of energy engulfed the air around Sita and began to whip around uncontrollably. The force behind it rivaled that of Gregory's tier 3 spell. The red striking shot spell was a powerful inner spell of Gregory. He always used this to sure kill a monster with a monster orb in the past. It's a fire attribute spell that has a temperature that was close to a planet's core. The debris of rocks around Gregory began to melt and the air was producing a powerful heat wave that could turn ordinary people into dust in just a second. Even if the rocks were strengthened by the mana in the air, it nonetheless melts because of how close it was to Gregory. Just go down. Gregory shouted and he launched a powerful flame beam towards Sita. Sita stood on the ground as he prepared himself. He never took his eyes off the flame beam that was heading at his direction. The massive gathering of best Faram on the tip of his finger reached its critical point. A moment later, It shot towards Gregory's spell without any delay. The blast was so powerful that the rocks disintegrated in its path and the wind whipped outwards at high speed. Siddha poured all of the best Faram in his body and shot the condense energy. This attack was called Bistru, a unique powerful attack of the monsters that brought terror to humans and demis. Boom. The two beams collided and it resulted in a powerful explosion that shook the entire city. The ground and the air produced ripples and it distorted everything that made contact with it. Master, you in danger. Randolph heard a voice inside his head. He replied by saying I know before he took a distance away with Eugen. He and Eugen stood side by side and created a barrier around them. Randolph created a powerful barrier but he knew that it still wasn't enough to protect them from the shock waves. Alfie. Eugen muttered in a low voice and a palm-sized girl materialized on his shoulder. The girl was wearing a simple knee-length green dress. She has shoulder-length blonde hair and around her were sparks of white lights. She was Alfie, the spirit of Eugen. There it is. The spirit. Randolph glanced at the spirit on Eugen's shoulder with an amused expression. Alfie, let's do this. Eugen said and he raised both of his hands. Yes, Eugen. Alfie replied to him and her powers spiked up. Spirit aerial 3-layered barrier. They created a powerful 3-layered wind barrier to protect them from any harm. A 3-layered barrier formed around Eugen and Randolph. Fuse. Eugen said and the barrier that he erected fused to the barrier that Randolph created making it more powerful. Still. Randolph then looked at Siddha. I didn't think that Siddha could use Bistru even though it's only a borrowed power from the potion. Ursus and Bargain who was watching the fight from the distance were startled when they saw this scene. Bargain stood up and he patted his clothes. He opened his mouth and said, these two are going to destroy the city. They didn't care about their surrounding at all, they just wanted to defeat the opponent in front of them. The city lord will be forced to make a move if this continued. Ursus nodded and said. I will minimize the aftershock of their attacks. I need to clean the mess that my students made. Bargain said before he vanished into thin air. One of the most powerful people of the Hebrae kingdom. Ursus muttered as he turned his head and looked at the huge explosion. Still. How did that Siddha use Bistru? Even though he has the best Faram in his body, it's still hard to use it. There's no record of that in the past era. The whole city turned bright and the darkness disappeared. Even the dark sky lit up because of the explosion. Alice and the rest stopped when the ground shook heavily. It was followed by a very loud booming sound. Then, the whole area turned bright as if a sun shone on the sky. Even though it's night, the whole city was as bright as noon. Alice and the rest turned their head and saw the unbelievable scene in front of them. How could Siddha fought on that scale? Joshua muttered in disbelief. The scale of the battle was several times higher than theirs. Siddha. Lamilia whispered Siddha's name with a concerned look on her face. She wasn't stunned at the scale of battles because she witnessed the power of the commandments. She saw how a single spell destroyed the desolate woods and the villages near it. Even that unknown power that took the life force of every living creature in the desolate woods was terrifying. There's a saying that if a person saw the power of the bringer of calamity, their point of view and power scale will greatly change. They would understand that there were people that reached the level where they could obliterate a country on their own. Alice glanced at Lamilia before she turned her head at the huge explosion. I see. Bargain appeared close to the explosion. He looked at the bright explosion and he squinted his eyes. The heat waves were of high temperature and the ground continued to tremble non-stop. Everything was being obliterated by the powerful explosion. Really, to think that Siddha would manage to match a noble head using the power he couldn't properly control. Bargain smiled wryly before he opened his arms widely. Well, let's stop this. He circulated his magical power inside his body. He made a grabbing motion and the explosion was blocked by something. It didn't pass through Bargain as it was contained by his energy. It didn't damage anything outside of the battlefield. This level of heat is nothing to me. I'm not called Flame Master for nothing. Bargain muttered as he easily contained this level of explosion. Back in the war against the Malosa country, he was the man who burned down everything in the outskirts of the desolate woods. He literally brought down a small sun at city size and obliterated most of the Malosa army. His power was close to God. Bargain then noticed something. He turned his head and smiled. I see. How loyal. He said then he aimed his hand at it. After a few moments, the explosion stopped and the whole area was filled with smoke and dust. The entire ground was wiped out as it became a desolate place. There's no building left after the explosion as all the buildings here were obliterated. Even the rocks and concrete roads turned into a pile of ash. Are you okay, Eugen? Randolph coughed and asked. He couldn't clearly see because of the thick smoke and dust in the surrounding. Somehow. Eugen replied and he created a wind around him to blow the smoke and dust. I'm sorry, Eugen. Alfie flew around and apologized to him. The barrier that they erected before was destroyed. It was shattered by the powerful explosion. The explosion was stronger than they imagined. It was because Bargain contained all of the explosion in this place. Randolph was forced to ask his guard to assist him. His guard cast a secret barrier around them that lessened the force of the impact when their barrier shattered. They still haven't escaped unscathed from the impact. They received a few bruises on their bodies. Thanks, you saved me there. Randolph said in his head. It's nothing, Master. A voice replied to him in his head. Who won? Randolph looked up and asked. Eugen heard Randolph's words, so he looked up to see who won the battle. He was also curious about who won the battle. They waited for a few moments before the wind dispersed the smoke and dust. They saw Suda, who was standing alone on the battlefield. His figure was covered in wounds and both of his arms were burned. He was breathing heavily and there's no blood stain on his body. He wasn't even sweating. His sweat and the blood on his body evaporated because of the high temperature. It's also thanks to the high temperature that all of his injuries closed. Huff. 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 Suda was gasping and he slowly placed the Vajra sword on its sheath. He reached his limit and he depleted his stamina. The best Faram inside his body was gone. There's nothing left inside him, even mana. He drained all the energy he has in this fight. I won. Until I leave the city, I will not go down. Suda muttered as gritted his teeth. He gulped and he felt thirsty. His throat was dry. You don't have to worry about your body. If you leave it to me, I'll follow your classmates. A feminine voice sounded inside his mind. Chapter 144, Chain Quest, Declaration. I can't move my body. Suda said as he tried to move his body with all of his gut, but unfortunately, he just fell on the ground. With a loud thud sound his body hit the ground, causing him to groan in pain. Ah! Damn! Suda cursed and he heard a familiar sound in his mind. Congratulations on completing Lumilia's special quest. You've received 50,000 EXP, 15 free attribute points, and 10 skill points. It's worth it? Suda said inwardly when he saw the rewards that he received from fighting Gregory. The battle was so hard that he had to use all of his trump cards. He only had one monster potion, so the next time he fought someone he couldn't handle, he wouldn't be able to use it once again. He would only depend on his dark grade weapon. Since he didn't hear a notification indicating that he killed Gregory only means one thing. And that's Gregory was still alive. But Suda was sure that Gregory was like him, exhausted, tired, and full of injuries. My level is quite lacking to take the other soul blood earring. But I benefited a lot in this quest, so my power will increase after this. I will provide a time to take it next time. Suda thought that he had to get the other earring to increase his power. Right now, he could only use the Harvester of the Soul skill of the earring. He couldn't use its second skill because he needed the other pair to use it. To reach the level of universal equipment, he needed the complete pair of earrings. Okay, I have received 15 free attribute points. Suda thought to use this to increase his vitality attribute. If he increased his vitality attribute, his health will grow, and also he would gain stamina. These two were connected to the vitality attribute after all. He would gain strength to leave the city. That's it, he was going to allocate his 15 free attribute points to vitality. When he was about to use his free attribute points, Suda heard something. I miscalculated the power of the explosion. Eugen said as he checked his body and found some wounds. I'll heal you, Eugen, Alfie said as she flew around him and cast a healing spell on Eugen. Randolph looked at it and asked, what about me? I need healing too. Umph. I only heal Eugen. I can see that you're not gravely injured, so you can move without healing. Alfie snorted as she glanced at Randolph on the corner of her eyes. She then went back to healing Eugen's small wounds. What a bratty spirit. Randolph commented when he saw her attitude towards him. I can hear you, you know. Alfie said in a loud voice. Haha, tell how old are you? Randolph laughed and asked. He was curious about the age of this spirit. If he wasn't wrong, the spirit race secluded themselves in the dark forest 1,000 years ago. Since then, no humans and demis saw them. They also didn't show themselves to humans and demis after that. You know, it's rude to ask that question to a lady. Alfie said as she looked at Randolph. Lady? From what I can see you're just a brat. Randolph said to her as a matter of fact. Alfie was about to say something when Eugen stopped her. Eugen sighed and said, she's 10 years old now. I found her when she's still a newborn spirit. I see. Randolph nodded his head and understood why she wasn't that powerful compared to the spirit that he read from the books. If this spirit grew from the dark forest alongside the other spirit, then she knew the special power of spirit and she would be able to use it better. Because the other spirit there will teach her how to use spirit power. Right now, she couldn't properly use it. Alfie hasn't met a single of her brethren ever since she was young. Eugen. Why are you telling him my age? Alfie complained to Eugen. Let's forget about it. Yujin shook his head and he looked at Suda who was lying on the ground. You should go and help him, Randolph said from the side. Yujin glanced at Randolph and when he was about to walk towards Suda, Randolph grabbed his wrist. He turned to Randolph and asked, "What?" "SHH." Randolph placed his finger in front of his mouth. Then, he pointed at something and said, "Look over there." Yujin followed Randolph's finger and saw a huge bear with red fur. The bear was approaching Suda with unsteady steps. There were burned marks in some part of the body of the bear as its fur was also burned. It seems that this bear took some heavy damage. "What's that bear?" Yujin asked when he saw the bear. "A red fur bear," Randolph answered Yujin's question. "I know that. I mean, what is that bear doing here in this place, in the middle of a city?" Yujin said as he rephrased his words. "Look. The bear is in front of Suda. I wonder what it's going to do." Randolph said. "Maybe it's going to eat him," Alafi said while watching the scene on Yujin's shoulder. "Isn't that bad?" Randolph looked at them and asked. "Yeah, let's help him." Yujin nodded and said. The red fur bear arrived in front of Suda. The bear sniffed Suda before she opened her mouth and gently bit his tattered clothes. Of course, this red fur bear was Yuko, Suda's beast companion, but they were oblivious to it. They don't even know that Suda have a beast companion. The bear bit him. "Yujin, the bear bit him." Alafi shouted when she saw it. "I know, I saw it," Yujin said to his spirit. "Wait, take a closer look. It's not biting him," Randolph said to the two. Yujin and Alafi stopped talking as both of them focused their attention on the bear. They saw the bear raised up its head and placed Suda on it back. Alafi was shocked when she saw this scene. Her eyes and mouth turned into an O shape. Then, she looked at Yujin and shouted, "Yujin! The bear is taking your classmate as food reserve." She said those words while throwing her small fists on Yujin's face. Randolph looked at Alafi and said, "Is that kind of thing always comes in your mind or not? Are you mocking me or not?" Alafi said in an angry tone as she pointed her finger at Randolph. "I'm just asking you." Randolph replied to her with a plain expression. "Stop. The bear is leaving with Suda in its back." Yujin stopped the two from arguing as he pointed at the bear who was walking away with Suda. Randolph and Alafi turned their heads and found that the bear was leaving with Suda. Alafi flew up in the air and looked at Yujin. She opened her mouth and said, "Come. Let's follow the bear, Yujin. If we follow it, there's a chance that we find its other victims." After saying that, she flew to follow the bear. Yujin sighed while looking at her figure. He had no other choice but to follow her. "Haha, let's go." Randolph laughed and said. Suda sighed when he saw that Yuko was fine. He didn't have to worry about her and himself. Since she was here, Suda was sure that Yuko would protect him from any harm. "You're lucky that you have a loyal pet." Saya's voice sounded in Suda's head. "Yeah, I am." Suda nodded at her words. He then closed his eyes and waited for Yuko to bring him out of the city. "I'm wondering where did learn my name?" Saya's question sounded in his head. "Where did you become so talkative?" Suda avoided her question by asking something. "Yufufu, you're so good at changing the topic. Actually, I have a lot of questions for you and I makes me interested in you. That's why I let you use my power." Saya laughed in his mind. "You will eventually know it in the future if you continue to follow me," Suda replied to her. Suddenly, a loud voice of a man sounded in the whole city. "I'm Ursus Vanus Vers." Suda heard the loud voice, so he perked up his ears and waited for Ursus' next words. What the hell is this man trying to do right now? Suda thought as he tried to think if Ursus has some backup plan if Gregory lose. "I apologized for what happened here in the city. It's all because my daughter did something unfavorable," Ursus announced. The students of the Mage Class 1B stopped in their tracks when they heard the loud voice. "Father?" Lamilia muttered as she looked up in the sky. "Svers. That's Class Rep's father. The most influential man of the Gripen city." Alice, Neo, and the rest knew that the voice came from Lamilia's father because of his name. They weren't familiar with Lamilia's father, but they knew his name because her father was somewhat famous. Ursus's voice sounded in the whole city as he declared, "From now on, I'm expelling my daughter, Lamilia von Svers, from the household of a Svers family. From now on, she has nothing to do with this family. I'm cutting all of her ties in this family." Everyone heard Ursus's announcement. This announcement shocked everyone in the city. Yufufu, he knew that if his daughter left the city, she will be targeted by people that are after the crystal flame honey, so he cut all her ties with him. Says chuckled. "I know," Suda said to her. "But there's something more to it." Chapter 145, Movements in the Dark. Ursus declared to the whole city that he cut all of his ties with Lamilia. It means that from now on, Lamilia doesn't have anything to do with the Svers family. She also lost her qualification to inherit the family. It's not surprising for Suda that Ursus did this. Ursus called Lamilia to come back to the mansion because some of his competitors might target her. If he really is concerned for her daughter, then why would he let her marry a man that she didn't even like, Suda muttered as he couldn't understand Ursus's reason. Yufufu, that's just how nobles are from the present and the past. They aren't really concerned about liking or not, all they thought is that feeling can be cultivated in time. Pretty annoying, right? Saya's voice sounded in Suda's head. Yeah, it's annoying. I really couldn't understand what's coming in the head of those nobles. Suda nodded at her words. Then, Suda heard a familiar sound in his mind. Quest 3 completed. You've received 25,000 EXP, 10 free attribute points, and 7 skill points. Lamilia's chain quest completed. You've received grade A score. Calculating the bonus rewards. Calculating completed. You've received 20,000 EXP, 6 free attribute points, and 4 skill points. Damn, it's all worth it? All my efforts in helping class rep didn't go in vain. Suda breathed a sigh of relief when he saw the notification in his mind. Completing the quest 3 means that Lamilia managed to leave the city on time. The rewards for this chain quest were enormous that he could level up one of his skills to a high level. The class promotion was just in Suda's sight. Someone is following us. Suda heard Saya's voice in his mind. Suda immediately stopped thinking about points as he was surprised by what he heard from Saya. Really? Suda asked to make sure of it because he hasn't noticed anything wrong around him. Yufufu, if you want to believe me then believe it, if not then it's not a problem for me. Saya chuckled while saying those words. What is it? Was what she's saying a true or not? Suda thought as he closed his eyes. He tried to guess if Saya was saying the truth or not. Okay, I'll believe her. But if someone is following me, who would follow me? Is it someone from Gregory's Knights, Esver's Knights, or maybe the city guards are finally making a move? Suda closed his eyes and tried to think of an answer to his question. Vidrato's knights were annihilated by the clash of the 2 tier 3 spells before. But what if there's someone that was still alive and right now that knight was following him? That's impossible because if it's really from Vidrato family then it's going to attack him right now in his most vulnerable time. Suda was exhausted and couldn't move his body, the knights of the Vidrato family wouldn't let him go if they found him like this. Suda eliminated the knights of the Vidrato family in the choices. The answer was one of the two, the knights of the Esver's family or the city guards. But Suda didn't know that 3 people were following him, 2 humans and 1 spirit. Somewhere inside the Gripen city. Gregory was walking in a dark alley with unsteady steps. His blood was dripping on the ground non-stop. He was only supporting himself as he could barely walk with his current condition. His battle with Suda took a toll on his body and the bistru that Suda used gravely injured him. If he didn't escape in time, he would be lying on the ground now. Huff. Huff. Damn. Gregory was gasping and he held the wound on his chest. He doesn't have any mana left in his energy pool to cast a spell. After all, he cast several tier 3 spells in the battle against Suda. After walking for a few steps, Gregory fell on his knees and he coughed a mouthful of blood. His blood splattered on the ground, dyeing it in crimson color. Why? Why didn't Ursus help me? I didn't sense his presence after he cast the tier 3 ice dome spell. Gregory muttered as he found this strange. Why Ursus disappeared after casting a single tier 3 spell? It was the question in Gregory's mind. He felt something was off now that he realized it. Something. That something prevented Ursus from making a move personally. Is it the city lord? Gregory immediately put this thought out of his mind. He knew that Ursus was a powerful man that could go against a monster that undergo 4th evolution. The city lord of the Gripen city wasn't Ursus' match in one-on-one battle. In the circle of nobles, Ursus was a powerful one among them. If Gregory's power was at the middle tier, then Ursus was at the top tier. Then, he remembered Suda's identity. The Ladro Institute. Gregory exclaimed. He recalled that Suda was the top 1 first year of the Ladro Institute. They secretly sent someone to protect him. They knew that Suda could handle me alone, so they didn't bother stopping him, but they knew that it was too early for him to fight someone at Ursus level, so they prevented Ursus from interfering in his fight. Gregory muttered as he understood what was happening. Damn. That Ladro Institute. They used me to sharpen their top student. I will remember this. Suda Ishi. I will take my revenge soon and no one will be able to stop me. Gregory cursed under his breath. He lost a lot this time. A lot of his knights died, including his direct subordinates, also his face. He would become a laughing stock in the circle of nobles if they knew that a first-year student beat him in a battle. Suddenly, he felt extreme pain burst on his chest. Arg. What? He looked down and saw a blade pass through his chest from his behind. He spat a mouthful of blood and he tried to turn his head to look at the culprit behind him. The culprit pulled back the blade and he fell on the ground with a loud thud sound. Arg! Gregory groaned in pain and he turned over. He saw the appearance of the one who stabbed him. He saw a beautiful girl with long lilac-colored hair that was tied in a ponytail. She's heterochromia, a person with different eye colors. Her left eye was blue while her right eye was color red. You. Gregory was surprised when he saw the appearance of the girl in front of him. Yufufu, I was about to let you go but I heard you mention my dearest Sita's name. The girl chuckled as she lifted her hand and covered her mouth. She then waved the blade in her hand and the blood on the blade splattered on the ground. Why Yuri? Gregory looked at the girl with wide open eyes. He knew the girl in front of him. Who didn't know her in this kingdom? She was the only person who dared to beat the prince of this kingdom. The most famous student of the Lodro Institute, Yanagi Shina. SHH. Please be quiet. Yanagi placed her finger in front of her lips and gestured him to keep quiet. No. I will not. Gregory shouted and was backing down but Yanagi stopped her. Yanagi moved her body forward and swiftly stabbed her blade on Gregory's throat. Arg! Gregory felt intense pain as Yanagi twisted the blade. His vision was blurring and his consciousness was seeping out of his body. If he wasn't gravely injured then he would be able to fight Yanagi Shina. Unfortunately for him, he experienced a fierce battle before. He was full of regret as he didn't expect that this would happen. Dying like wasn't in his plan. He only came to the city to strengthen the engagement of his son and Lumilia. I don't want to die like this. Gregory forced out these words out of his mouth. He lifted up both of his hands and grabbed the blade. You deserve to die like this after doing that to my Sita. I'll kill you. No, I'll torture you first, Yanagi said as she breathed frantically. Her chest heaved up and down. Suddenly, her expression turned serious. She was looking at Gregory as if she was looking at trash. She slowly opened her mouth and said, well, I'll kill you now. Followed by those words, she swung the blade in her hand. Gregory's head flew in the mid-air before it landed on the ground while splashing blood on it. I wanted to torture you but I need to move now, so count yourself lucky, Yanagi said to him before she placed her palm on Gregory's body. Her magic power slide rose and flames appeared on Gregory's body. Goodbye to you, Yanagi. Leave these words as she vanished into thin air. Part 6 of the series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe so we can be motivated to make even better videos in the future.